Altered states make the mystery of human consciousness even more interesting. How is it that when we sleep at night we are dreaming? How is it that plants grown on the earth and drinks made in breweries have such immense effect on the human experience? Today, we will explore the 100 levels of altered states that humans and animals alike experience. Level 1. The everyday trance of highway hypnosis. Let's start with something you've probably experienced but never named. You're driving on a long, familiar stretch of highway. The road is straight, the traffic is light, and your mind begins to wander. Before you know it, you've traveled 10, maybe 15 miles, and you have almost no memory of the journey. Your hands steered, your foot worked the pedals, but you weren't really there. This is called highway hypnosis, and it's one of the most common altered states humans enter without even realizing it. What's happening is that your brain has shifted into a kind of autopilot mode. The conscious, attentive part of your mind has stepped back, and older, more automatic systems have taken over. You're still processing information, still responding to the road, but you're doing it without awareness. It's not sleep, and it's not full waking consciousness either. It's something in between. A light trance state that your brain slips into when a task becomes routine and predictable. This tells us something important right from the start. Altered states aren't always dramatic. They don't always involve drugs or ceremonies or intense experiences. Sometimes they're quiet, subtle shifts that happen in the background of everyday life. Your consciousness is more flexible than you might think, constantly adjusting its mode, depending on what you're doing and how much attention the situation requires. Highway hypnosis is just the beginning, a glimpse into how easily your brain can shift gears without you noticing. Level 2. The hypnagogic state between waking and sleep. Every night, as you lie down and begin to drift off, you pass through a strange territory. You're not awake anymore, but you're not quite asleep either. Images might flash through your mind, vivid and strange. You might hear sounds that aren't there, voices calling your name, footsteps in an empty room. Sometimes your body jerks suddenly, as if you're falling. This is the hypnagogic state, the threshold between waking and sleeping, and it's one of the most fascinating altered states we experience regularly. During this transition, your brain is doing something remarkable. The logical, reality-testing parts of your mind are powering down, while the imaginative, associative parts are powering up. This creates a unique mental environment where thoughts become images, where internal and external sensations blur together, where the rules of normal perception don't quite apply. Some people see geometric patterns, kaleidoscopic colors, faces of strangers. Others experience a sense of presence, the feeling that someone is in the room with them. Artists, writers, and inventors have long recognized the creative potential of this state. Thomas Edison reportedly used to hold ball bearings in his hand as he dozed in a chair. When he fell asleep, the bearings would drop and wake him, allowing him to capture the insights that emerged in that in-between place. The hypnagogic state is proof that altered consciousness isn't just about escaping reality. Sometimes it's about accessing parts of your mind that normal waking consciousness keeps locked away. Level 3. The flow state of complete absorption. There are moments when you become so absorbed in what you're doing that everything else disappears. Time seems to stop. Your sense of self fades into the background. You're not thinking about what you're doing. You're just doing it. And it feels effortless, natural, even joyful. Psychologists call this flow, and it's an altered state that can happen during almost any activity, from playing music to writing code to climbing a mountain. Flow was studied extensively by a researcher named Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who interviewed thousands of people about their peak experiences. What he found was that flow tends to occur when you're engaged in something challenging but not overwhelming, when your skills are well matched to the difficulty of the task. In this sweet spot, your brain enters a mode of heightened focus and reduced self-consciousness. The default mode network, the part of your brain associated with self-referential thinking and mind-wandering, quiets down. You stop monitoring yourself, stop judging your performance, and just act. What makes flow interesting as an altered state is that it shows how consciousness can shift not just in content, but in structure. In normal waking consciousness, there's usually a sense of separation between you and what you're doing, between the observer and the observed. In flow, that separation collapses. You and the activity become one. This isn't just a metaphor. Brain imaging shows that during flow, the areas responsible for self-awareness and internal monitoring actually decrease in activity. The self, in a sense, gets out of its own way, and performance becomes fluid and intuitive. Level 4. The disorientation of sensory deprivation. In the 1950s, researchers began experimenting with sensory deprivation, placing people in dark, soundproof tanks filled with body temperature water. The goal was to see what happens to consciousness when you remove almost all external input. What they found was both surprising and unsettling. Within hours, sometimes minutes, people began to hallucinate. They saw lights, heard voices, felt presences. Their sense of time became distorted. Some experienced intense anxiety, while others reported profound peace. Sensory deprivation reveals how much of normal consciousness depends on a constant stream of input from the outside world. Your brain is always processing sights, sounds, sensations, using them to construct a stable model of reality. When that input is removed, the brain doesn't just go quiet, it starts generating its own content, filling the void with internally generated experiences. This is why solitary confinement is so damaging. Without sensory and social input, consciousness can become untethered, drifting into strange and sometimes disturbing territory. But sensory deprivation can also be therapeutic. Modern float tanks are used for relaxation and meditation. In small doses, the experience can be deeply restful, allowing the mind to settle into a state of calm that's difficult to achieve in the noise of daily life. The key seems to be control and context. When you choose to enter sensory deprivation and can leave whenever you want, it's an exploration. When it's imposed, it becomes torture. The same altered state, wildly different experiences. Level 5. The Euphoria of Runner's High. If you've ever pushed through the discomfort of a long run and suddenly felt a wave of euphoria wash over you, you've experienced runner's high. The pain fades, your mood lifts, and you feel like you could run forever. For a long time, this was attributed to endorphins, the body's natural painkillers. But more recent research suggests that endocannabinoids, molecules similar to the active compounds in cannabis, play a major role. What's happening is that intense physical exertion triggers the release of these chemicals, which cross into the brain and activate receptors throughout the nervous system. The result is a natural altered state, one that combines pain relief, mood elevation, and sometimes even mild euphoria. It's the body's way of rewarding you for pushing your limits, encouraging behaviors that, from an evolutionary perspective, might help with survival, like persistence hunting or escaping danger. But runner's high is about more than just chemistry. There's also a psychological component, the rhythmic nature of running, the focus required to maintain pace, the gradual quieting of mental chatter. All of this contributes to a meditative quality. Your attention narrows to the sensation of movement, the rhythm of breath, the feeling of your feet hitting the ground. In this way, runner's high is both a biochemical state and a form of moving meditation, showing how altered states often emerge from the interaction of body and mind. Level 6. The time distortion of extreme fear. Time seems to slow down during moments of extreme danger. People in car accidents report that everything happened in slow motion. They saw details they normally wouldn't notice. They had time to think, to react, in what was objectively just a fraction of a second. This is not a trick of memory. Though memory plays a role, it's a real shift in how consciousness processes time. When your brain detects a serious threat, it kicks into a high alert mode. The amygdala, the brain's fear center, becomes highly active and starts laying down memories in much greater detail than normal. Your attention becomes hyperfused, filtering out anything irrelevant to survival. The result is that you take in more information per unit of time, and because memory is richer and more detailed, looking back on the event makes it feel like it lasted longer than it did. This time, distortion is an altered state optimized for survival. By slowing down your subjective experience, your brain gives you more time to make decisions, to react, to find a way out. It's not that you're actually moving or thinking faster in absolute terms. It's that your consciousness has shifted into a mode where every moment is experienced with heightened clarity and intensity. Once the danger passes, time snaps back to normal, but the memory of that slowed-down moment remains vivid and strange. Level 7. The meditative calm of rhythmic breathing. Sit quietly for a moment and pay attention to your breath. Slow it down. Breathe in for 4 counts, hold for 4, breathe out for 4. Do this for just a few minutes and you'll notice something shift. Your heart rate slows, your muscles relax. Your mind, which was racing with thoughts a moment ago, begins to settle. This is one of the simplest altered states you can induce, and it requires nothing but attention and breath. What's happening is that you're engaging the parasympathetic nervous system, the part of your autonomic system responsible for rest and relaxation. Normally, your breathing is automatic, controlled by the brainstem without conscious input. But when you take control, when you breathe slowly and deliberately, you send a signal to your body that it's safe to relax. This has a cascading effect, reducing stress hormones, lowering blood pressure, and shifting your brain into a calmer state. Contemplative traditions have known this for thousands of years. Breath control is central to yoga, to meditation, to many forms of prayer. What's remarkable is how reliable it is. You don't need to believe in anything, don't need special training. Just slow your breath, and your consciousness shifts. It becomes less reactive, more spacious, more present. It's a reminder that altered states aren't always about going somewhere else. Sometimes they're about coming back to something simple and fundamental, like the rhythm of your own breathing. Level 8. The strange reality of lucid dreams. Most dreams happen to you. You're swept along by the dream's logic, reacting to events as they unfold, often without questioning the absurdity of it all. But sometimes, in the middle of a dream, you suddenly realize that you're dreaming. This is called lucid dreaming, and it's one of the most fascinating altered states because it combines 2 modes of consciousness that normally don't coexist: the dream state and self-awareness. In a lucid dream, you're still asleep, still dreaming, but you've gained a measure of conscious control. Some people can steer the dream, choosing where to go, what to do, even manipulating the environment. You can fly, walk through walls, have conversations with dream characters who seem to have their own personalities and insights. The experience can be exhilarating, surreal, and sometimes deeply meaningful. What makes lucid dreaming interesting from a scientific perspective is that it shows consciousness is not binary. You're not simply awake or asleep. There are hybrid states, places where different aspects of consciousness mix in unusual ways. Brain imaging of lucid dreamers shows increased activity in the prefrontal cortex, the area associated with self-awareness and decision-making, while the rest of the brain remains in the dream state. You're awake enough to know you're dreaming, but asleep enough that the dream continues. It's a doorway into the flexibility of consciousness itself. Level 9. The awe of overwhelming beauty. Stand at the edge of the Grand Canyon. Look up at a sky full of stars, far from city lights. Listen to a piece of music so beautiful it makes your chest ache. In these moments, you might feel something researchers call awe, a complex emotion that combines wonder, reverence, and a sense of being small in the face of something vast. Awe is an altered state, one that temporarily shifts how you see yourself in the world. Studies have shown that experiences of awe actually change perception and cognition. People who feel awe report feeling like they have more time available, are more willing to help others, and feel more connected to something larger than themselves. Brain imaging suggests that awe quiets the default mode network, the same system that goes quiet during meditation and flow. The constant chatter of self-concern fades, and you become more present, more open. What's particularly interesting is that awe doesn't require anything mystical or spiritual. You can feel awe looking at a mountain or a mathematical proof, listening to Beethoven or watching a storm roll in. The common thread is encountering something that exceeds your current mental frameworks, something so vast or complex or beautiful that it forces you to expand your sense of what's possible. Awe is consciousness recognizing its own smallness, and paradoxically, that recognition can feel profoundly meaningful. Level 10. The trance of repetitive drumming. In cultures around the world, rhythmic drumming has been used for thousands of years to induce altered states. The steady, repetitive beat, often around 4 to 7 beats per second, has a hypnotic quality. Your attention locks onto the rhythm, and after a while, something shifts. Time becomes fluid. Your sense of self softens. You might feel like you're moving without deciding to move, dancing without thinking about the steps. Researchers have studied what happens in the brain during rhythmic drumming, and the findings are intriguing. The repetitive auditory input seems to entrain brain waves, pulling them into a synchronized pattern. This is called auditory driving, and it can shift consciousness toward theta wave activity, the same pattern associated with deep meditation and the early stages of sleep. The rhythm becomes a kind of anchor, holding attention in place while the rest of consciousness drifts. This is why drumming circles, raves, and ecstatic dance have such a powerful effect. The music doesn't just accompany the experience, it actively shapes consciousness. Your brain starts resonating with the external rhythm, and in that resonance, normal self-consciousness can dissolve. You're not thinking about dancing, you're just moving. You're not observing the experience, you're inside it. The drum beat becomes a bridge into a different mode of being, one that's more embodied, more instinctive, more connected to rhythm than to thought. Level 11. The dissociation of extreme stress. When the mind is overwhelmed, when pain or fear becomes too much to bear, consciousness sometimes protects itself by disconnecting. This is called dissociation, and it's an altered state where you feel detached from your own body, your emotions, or your sense of reality. People describe it as watching themselves from outside, as if they're observing their own life through a window. Everything feels distant, unreal, like a movie playing out that doesn't quite involve them. Dissociation exists on a spectrum. Mild forms are common, like spacing out during a boring lecture or feeling numb after receiving shocking news. More severe forms can occur during trauma, where the mind essentially says, "This is too much," and creates distance as a survival mechanism. You're still present, still functioning, but you're not fully there. The connection between experience and self has been temporarily severed. What this reveals is that consciousness is not a single, fixed thing. It's modular, made up of different components that can come apart under pressure. The sense of being in your body, the feeling that experiences belong to you, the emotional resonance of events, these are all processes that usually work together seamlessly. But when the system is pushed to its limits, it can fragment. Dissociation is the mind's circuit breaker, a way of managing the unmanageable. And while it can be adaptive in the moment, it shows just how fragile the sense of unified consciousness really is. Level 12. The warmth of alcohol's first effects. You take a sip of wine, a drink of beer, and within minutes you feel it. A gentle warmth spreads through your body. Your muscles relax. Conversation flows a little easier. Social anxiety softens. This is alcohol's initial effect, one of the most common and culturally accepted altered states in human history. But what exactly is happening in your brain? Alcohol is a depressant, meaning it slows down activity in the central nervous system. It enhances the effect of GABA, a neurotransmitter, that inhibits neural activity while reducing the effect of glutamate, which excites it. The result is a general damping of brain function, starting with the areas responsible for judgment and inhibition. This is why the first effect of alcohol is often a feeling of release, a loosening of the usual constraints on behavior and thought. But alcohol's effects are dose-dependent and biphasic. At low doses, it can feel stimulating and pleasant. You're more social, more relaxed, more confident. As the dose increases, the depressant effects take over. Coordination suffers, speech slurs, memory formation is impaired. Push it further, and alcohol becomes dangerous, potentially lethal. This is the paradox of many psychoactive substances. The line between therapeutic or recreational use and harm is often narrow, and it's easy to cross without realizing it. The altered state that begins as warmth and connection can slide into confusion and danger. Level 13. The clarity after a good night's sleep. You wake up after a night of deep, restful sleep, and the world seems different. Colors are brighter. Problems that seemed insurmountable yesterday now feel manageable. Your mind is clear. Your mood is stable. Your body feels refreshed. This is not normal waking consciousness. This is consciousness after it's been properly restored, and the difference is striking. During sleep, your brain does essential maintenance work. It clears out metabolic waste that accumulates during the day, consolidates memories, processes emotions, and repairs cellular damage. When you don't get enough sleep, these processes are interrupted and consciousness suffers. You're technically awake, but you're operating in a compromised state, more irritable, more impulsive, less able to focus or regulate emotion. Chronic sleep deprivation is, in a sense, a chronic altered state, one where consciousness never fully returns to baseline. What this tells us is that the quality of your waking consciousness depends heavily on what happens during sleep. The altered states you move through each night, the cycles of deep sleep and REM, are not separate from your waking life. They're the foundation of it. Consciousness is not just what happens when you're awake. It's a rhythm, a cycle, and the health of the whole system depends on respecting that rhythm. When you do, when you give sleep the time and priority it needs, waking consciousness becomes what it's meant to be: clear, vibrant, alive. Level 14. The intensity of caffeine's focus. Millions of people around the world start their day with the same ritual, a cup of coffee or tea. Within 20 minutes, the grogginess lifts, thoughts become sharper, energy returns. This is caffeine, the world's most widely used psychoactive substance, and it produces a specific altered state that's become so normalized we barely think of it as altered at all. Caffeine works by blocking adenosine receptors in the brain. Adenosine is a molecule that builds up throughout the day and makes you feel sleepy. By preventing adenosine from doing its job, caffeine keeps you alert and focused. It also triggers the release of dopamine and other neurotransmitters that enhance mood and motivation. The result is a state of heightened mental energy, improved concentration, and reduced perception of effort. But caffeine's effects are not purely positive. Too much can lead to jitteriness, anxiety, and difficulty sleeping, which then requires more caffeine the next day, creating a cycle. Tolerance develops quickly, meaning you need more to get the same effect. And withdrawal, though mild compared to many drugs, is real. People who quit caffeine often experience headaches, fatigue, and irritability for several days. What makes caffeine interesting as an altered state is how seamlessly it's integrated into daily life. Most people don't think of themselves as using a drug, but that's exactly what they're doing, and the state it produces, focused, alert, motivated, is one that modern life practically demands. Caffeine has shaped how we work, how we socialize, even how we think about energy and productivity. It's a reminder that altered states aren't always exotic or forbidden. Sometimes they're hiding in plain sight, in a morning cup of coffee. Level 15. The timelessness of deep meditation. Sit in meditation long enough, with patient attention to the breath or a mantra, or simply open awareness, and something remarkable can happen. The usual sense of time begins to dissolve. Minutes can feel like hours, or hours like minutes. The boundary between self and environment softens. Thoughts still arise, but you're no longer caught up in them. They pass like clouds through an open sky. This is the deep meditative state, and it's one of the most studied altered states in neuroscience. Brain imaging of experienced meditators shows significant changes in activity patterns. The default mode network, responsible for mind-wandering and self-referential thought, shows decreased activity. Meanwhile, areas associated with attention and interoception, awareness of internal body states, show increased activity. The brain is awake and alert, but it's not caught up in the usual narratives and planning. Consciousness becomes more spacious, less cluttered. What's particularly interesting is that these changes aren't just temporary. Long-term meditators show structural differences in their brains, including increased gray matter density in areas related to attention, emotion regulation, and self-awareness. The altered state, practiced regularly over years, actually reshapes the organ that produces consciousness. This suggests that meditation is not just a way to relax or feel good in the moment. It's a form of mental training that can fundamentally change how consciousness operates, making it more stable, more clear, more capable of meeting life with equanimity. Level 16. The confusion of sleep inertia. You're jolted awake by an alarm in the middle of the night. For a moment, you have no idea where you are. Your mind is thick, slow, unresponsive. Simple tasks feel impossibly difficult. This is sleep inertia, the grogginess that can last anywhere from a few minutes to half an hour after waking, especially when you're pulled out of deep sleep. It's an altered state that sits uncomfortably between sleeping and waking. During sleep inertia, parts of your brain are awake while others are still in a sleep-like state. Brain imaging shows that activity in the prefrontal cortex, responsible for complex thinking and decision-making, is significantly reduced. You're conscious, but your consciousness is impaired, running at partial capacity. This is why waking suddenly in the middle of the night and trying to make decisions can be dangerous. You're not fully there. Sleep inertia is also why shift workers and people on call, like doctors and firefighters, face particular challenges. Being woken from deep sleep and expected to perform complex tasks immediately puts them in a compromised cognitive state. Studies have shown that performance during sleep inertia can be as impaired as being legally intoxicated. The altered state passes as the brain fully wakes up, but in those first minutes, consciousness is genuinely altered, slower, less capable, more vulnerable to error. It's a reminder that the transition between states is not always clean or instantaneous. Level 17. The Euphoria of MDMA. In the 1980s, a drug called MDMA, commonly known as ecstasy or Molly, moved from therapeutic contexts into recreational use. People who took it reported something unusual, a profound sense of connection, empathy, and love. Anxiety and fear melted away. Walls between people came down. Conversations became deep and meaningful. For a few hours, the world felt safe, beautiful, full of possibility. This is the altered state that MDMA produces, and it's unlike almost anything else. MDMA works primarily by flooding the brain with serotonin, the neurotransmitter associated with mood, and also releasing dopamine and norepinephrine. The surge of serotonin creates feelings of emotional warmth and connectedness, while the dopamine adds energy and pleasure. The amygdala, the brain's fear center, becomes less active, which reduces anxiety and makes it easier to access difficult emotions without being overwhelmed. This is why MDMA is being studied as a treatment for PTSD. In a therapeutic setting, it allows people to revisit traumatic memories without the usual fear response, making it possible to process and integrate experiences that would otherwise be too painful to confront. The altered state is not about escaping reality, but about temporarily changing the emotional context so healing can occur. But MDMA is not without risks. The serotonin surge can be followed by a crash, leaving people feeling depleted and depressed for days. At high doses or with frequent use, it can damage serotonin neurons. And in uncontrolled settings, it's easy to overheat, become dehydrated, or combine it with other substances in dangerous ways. The altered state it produces is powerful and potentially therapeutic, but it demands respect and caution. Level 18. The stillness of sensory satiation. Imagine eating your favorite food. The first few bites are incredible, bursting with flavor, deeply satisfying. But as you continue, something changes. The flavor becomes less intense. Your interest wanes. By the end, you might even feel a little nauseous, unable to take another bite. This is sensory satiation, and while it's not usually thought of as an altered state, It reflects a real shift in how consciousness processes pleasure. What's happening is that your brain's reward system is adapting. The neurons that respond to the taste of the food gradually become less responsive with repeated exposure. This is called habituation, and it's a fundamental feature of how consciousness works. Novelty captures attention and generates pleasure. Repetition dulls both. The same food that was delicious minutes ago now barely registers. This process applies far beyond eating. It happens with music, with scenery, with experiences of all kinds. The first time you see the ocean or hear a particular song, it can be overwhelming. The 100th time, it's background. Your consciousness has adapted, filtered it out as less relevant. This is why people chase novelty, why routines become boring, why the hedonic treadmill is so hard to escape. The altered state here is not dramatic, but it's significant. Your baseline experience of pleasure and interest is constantly shifting based on exposure, and this shapes everything from what you eat to how you spend your time. Level 19, the panic of a panic attack. Your heart starts racing, you can't catch your breath. A wave of terror washes over you, even though there's no obvious threat. You feel like you're dying, losing control, going insane. This is a panic attack, and it's one of the most distressing altered states a person can experience. What makes it particularly cruel is that it often comes out of nowhere, with no clear trigger. A panic attack is essentially your body's fight or flight response activating without an external threat. The sympathetic nervous system floods your body with adrenaline. Your heart rate spikes, your breathing quickens, your muscles tense. These are all useful responses if you're facing danger, but when they happen for no reason, they're terrifying. The fear itself then becomes the threat, creating a feedback loop where the physical symptoms amplify the psychological panic, which amplifies the physical symptoms. From a consciousness perspective, a panic attack is a state where the mind is trapped in a loop of catastrophic interpretation. Every sensation is read as evidence of disaster. The racing heart means you're having a heart attack. The shortness of breath means you're suffocating. The dizziness means you're losing consciousness. None of this is true, but in the moment, it feels absolutely real. The altered state is one of intense, overwhelming fear, and breaking the loop requires recognizing that the sensations, while real, are not dangerous. This is easier said than done, but it's the key. The state passes, always, usually within minutes, even though those minutes feel endless. Level 20, the absorption of reading fiction. You open a novel and begin to read. At first, you're aware of the words on the page, the physical book in your hands, the room around you. But as you continue, something shifts. You're no longer reading about characters. You're with them, seeing what they see, feeling what they feel. The room has disappeared. Time has stopped. You've entered the world of the story so completely that when someone interrupts you, it's jarring, almost painful to return. This is one of the most common and underappreciated altered states. Reading fiction, when it's working, is a form of guided hallucination. Your brain is generating vivid sensory and emotional experiences based purely on abstract symbols, black marks on a page or screen. There's no actual visual input of the scene you're imagining, no sound, no physical sensation, and yet you experience it all. Your consciousness has shifted from perceiving the external world to creating an internal one. Brain imaging studies have shown that reading engages far more than just language areas. When you read about someone running, motor areas of your brain activate. When you read about a character feeling sad, emotional areas respond as if you were feeling sad yourself. You're not passively receiving information. You're simulating the experiences described, running them through your own neural systems. This is why fiction can be so powerful, so transporting. It hijacks the same mechanisms you use to understand real life and redirects them into an imagined world. For as long as you're absorbed, that world is, in a meaningful sense, real to you. Level 21. The Hyperawareness of Cannabis. Cannabis, marijuana, weed, however you name it, produces an altered state that millions of people seek out regularly. The effects vary widely depending on the strain, the dose, and the person, but certain patterns are common. Colors seem more vibrant, music sounds richer, more layered, food tastes incredible. Time slows down, thoughts become more associative, jumping from one idea to another in unexpected ways. And for many people, there's a sense of novelty, as if you're seeing familiar things with fresh eyes. The primary psychoactive compound in cannabis is THC, which binds to cannabinoid receptors throughout the brain and body. These receptors are part of the endocannabinoid system, which plays a role in regulating mood, memory, appetite, and pain. When THC activates these receptors, it disrupts normal signaling patterns, leading to the characteristic effects of being high. One of the most interesting aspects of the cannabis state is the way it alters perception and attention. Things that would normally fade into the background become fascinating. You might spend 20 minutes examining the texture of a wall or listening to a single song on repeat. This is sometimes called stoned thinking, a mode where novelty and curiosity are heightened, but focus and short-term memory are impaired. You have insights that feel profound in the moment, but when you try to remember them later, they've evaporated. Cannabis also has a dark side. For some people, especially at higher doses, it can trigger anxiety or paranoia. The altered state becomes uncomfortable, even frightening. And long-term heavy use is associated with cognitive changes, particularly in adolescents whose brains are still developing. Like most psychoactive substances, cannabis is not universally beneficial or harmful. The altered state it produces can be therapeutic, recreational, or problematic, depending on context, dose, and individual vulnerability. Level 22. The Serenity of Floating. Imagine lying in a tank filled with water saturated with Epsom salt, so dense that you float effortlessly on the surface. The water is heated to skin temperature, so you can't tell where your body ends and the water begins. The tank is dark and silent, cutting off almost all external stimulation. This is flotation therapy, also called restricted environmental stimulation therapy, and it produces a unique altered state. At first, many people feel restless or anxious. The lack of input is disorienting. But if you stay with it, something shifts. Your sense of your body's boundaries begins to blur. Without visual or tactile reference points, you lose the normal sense of where you are in space. Time becomes strange, difficult to track. And after a while, many people report entering a deeply relaxed state, almost trance-like, where thoughts slow down and a sense of peace settles in. Research on flotation therapy has shown measurable effects. It reduces levels of cortisol, the stress hormone, and increases production of endorphins. Brainwave patterns shift toward theta waves associated with deep relaxation and creativity. People often emerge from a float session feeling refreshed, less anxious, more mentally clear. It's as if the noise of normal consciousness has been turned down, allowing a quieter, calmer baseline to emerge. What's fascinating is that this altered state is achieved not by adding something, but by removing nearly everything. No drugs, no intense stimulation, just the absence of input. It shows that consciousness is not just shaped by what comes in from the outside. It's also shaped by the constant presence of sensation, and when that's taken away, a different mode of being becomes possible. Level 23. The Distortion of Nitrous Oxide. Dentists have used it for over a century as an anesthetic, and recreational users call it laughing gas. Nitrous oxide produces a brief but intense altered state. You inhale the gas, and within seconds, reality begins to ripple. Sounds become distorted, stretched out, echoing. Your body feels strange, heavy, and light at the same time. And there's often a sense of profound insight, as if you've just understood something deeply important about the nature of existence, though when the effects wear off 30 seconds later, you can rarely articulate what it was. Nitrous oxide works by affecting several neurotransmitter systems, including NMDA receptors, which are involved in learning, memory, and perception. The result is a dissociative state where you feel detached from your body and your normal sense of reality. Time and space become fluid. The boundaries between self and world blur. For a brief moment, ordinary consciousness is completely disrupted. William James, one of the founders of psychology, famously experimented with nitrous oxide and wrote about the peculiar sense of metaphysical revelation it produced. He noted that the insights felt utterly convincing while under the influence, but evaporated upon return to normal consciousness. This gap between the felt significance of an altered state and its actual content is something that appears again and again with different substances. The state feels meaningful, but what it reveals, if anything, is hard to pin down. Nitrous oxide is considered relatively safe when used properly, but it's not without risks. Repeated use can lead to vitamin B12 deficiency, which can cause nerve damage. And because the effects are so short-lived, there's a temptation to use it repeatedly in quick succession, which can lead to oxygen deprivation. It's another example of how altered states, even brief ones, come with both potential insights and real dangers. Level 24. The energy of a manic episode. For people with bipolar disorder, consciousness can swing between extremes. During a manic episode, the world becomes electric. Energy surges. Ideas flow so fast they tumble over each other. Sleep feels unnecessary. Confidence is boundless. Everything seems possible, urgent, interconnected. This is not simply feeling happy or excited. It's an altered state where the normal brakes on thought and behavior are released, and consciousness accelerates into something unsustainable. Mania involves changes in neurotransmitter systems, particularly dopamine, which is associated with motivation and reward. Brain imaging shows increased activity in regions involved in emotion and reward processing, and decreased activity in areas responsible for judgment and impulse control. The result is a state where ideas feel brilliant, plans feel foolproof, and consequences feel irrelevant. People in manic states might spend money recklessly, make impulsive decisions, engage in risky behavior, all while feeling more alive and capable than ever. But mania is not sustainable, and it's often not as pleasant as it sounds. The racing thoughts can become overwhelming, fragmenting into confusion. The boundless energy can tip into agitation and irritability. And when the episode ends, it's often followed by a crash into depression. What looks from the outside like happiness or creativity is, for the person experiencing it, a state of consciousness that's out of control. Mania is a reminder that altered states can emerge from within, from the brain's own chemistry gone awry, without any external substance or practice. And it shows that the line between enhanced consciousness and impaired consciousness is not always clear. The same state that produces bursts of creativity and energy can also lead to destroyed relationships, financial ruin, and profound suffering. Level 25. The Fog of Anesthesia. You're lying on an operating table. The anesthesiologist tells you to count backward from 10. You reach 7, maybe 6, and then nothing. Hours pass. Surgery is performed on your body, and you experience none of it. When you wake, it's as if no time has passed. General anesthesia is one of the most complete erasures of consciousness we have, and despite using it millions of times a year, we still don't fully understand how it works. Anesthetics are not a single drug, but a class of substances that disrupt consciousness in different ways. Some, like propofol, enhance the effects of GABA, the brain's main inhibitory neurotransmitter, essentially turning down the volume on neural activity. Others interfere with the channels that neurons use to communicate. The common result is a loss of consciousness so complete that you don't even dream. You're not asleep. You're gone. What makes anesthesia philosophically interesting is what it reveals about the fragility of consciousness. With the right chemical, administered in the right dose, you can be switched off like a light. There's no gradual fading, no in-between state where you're partially aware. One moment you're conscious, the next you're not. And when you return, there's no memory of the gap. It's a form of time travel, in a sense, jumping forward without experiencing the journey. This raises questions about the continuity of the self. If consciousness can be interrupted so completely, are you the same person who went under? What makes you you if the thread of experience can be cut and restarted? These aren't just abstract questions. They touch on deep issues about identity, about what it means to be conscious, and about the strange fact that the thing you are most intimately, your awareness, can be turned off and on by molecules. Level 26. The vividness of fever. Dreams. You're sick, lying in bed with a high fever. Your body aches, your head throbs, and when you close your eyes, the dreams that come are strange, intense, unsettling. They're not like normal dreams. They're more vivid, more bizarre, often disturbing. You might dream that your body is the wrong size, that you're trapped in repeating loops, that the room is closing in. These are fever dreams, and they're an altered state produced by the body's immune response. When you have a fever, your brain is operating in an environment it's not designed for. The elevated temperature affects neurotransmitter function and neural activity patterns. The immune system releases cytokines, signaling molecules that can cross into the brain and affect mood, cognition, and perception. The result is a state where consciousness becomes untethered, producing dreams that are more chaotic and emotionally intense than usual. Fever dreams often have a repetitive, obsessive quality. You might dream about solving an impossible puzzle, stacking infinite objects, or being stuck in a loop you can't escape. There's also often a sense of scale distortion, where objects or your own body feel enormous or tiny. These are not random. They reflect the brain's struggle to maintain coherent consciousness under physiological stress. What fever dreams show is that consciousness is not just a product of neural activity. It's also dependent on the body's overall state, on temperature, on immune function, on metabolic balance. When those systems are disrupted, even by something as common as a flu, consciousness can become strange and disturbing. The altered state passes as the fever breaks, but while it lasts, it's a reminder of how dependent the mind is on the body's delicate equilibrium. Level 27. The sharpness of cold exposure. Step into a cold shower, plunge into icy water, or stand outside in winter wearing minimal clothing, and within seconds, your consciousness shifts. The cold is shocking, overwhelming, demanding every bit of your attention. Your breath quickens, your heart races, and if you stay with it, if you resist the urge to escape, something interesting happens. The initial panic subsides, your breathing steadies. A sense of clarity, even euphoria, can emerge. This is the altered state of deliberate cold exposure. Cold exposure activates the sympathetic nervous system, the same system responsible for fight or flight responses. Norepinephrine, a neurotransmitter associated with alertness and focus, surges. This creates a state of heightened awareness and energy. At the same time, the intense sensation of cold forces your attention into the present moment. There's no room for worrying about the past or planning the future. You're simply there, in your body, managing the cold. Regular cold exposure has been linked to various benefits, from improved mood to enhanced immune function. Some of this is physiological, adaptations to repeated stress, but some of it is psychological. Learning to stay calm and breathe through discomfort builds resilience, a sense of agency over your own state. The altered state becomes a training ground for managing stress in other areas of life. Cold exposure is also used in some contemplative traditions as a form of meditation, a way to confront discomfort and develop equanimity. Wim Hof, known as the Iceman, has popularized techniques combining cold exposure with breathing exercises, demonstrating remarkable control over physiological responses typically considered involuntary. The altered state here is not about escaping reality, but about engaging with it so intensely that normal mental patterns are disrupted, creating space for something new. Level 28. The Disorientation of Jet Lag. You've flown across multiple time zones, and now your body doesn't know what time it is. It's noon, but your brain insists it's the middle of the night. You're exhausted but can't sleep. You're hungry at strange hours. Your mood is off. Concentration is difficult. This is jet lag, and it's an altered state caused by the misalignment between your internal clock and the external environment. Your body runs on a circadian rhythm, a roughly 24-hour cycle regulated by a cluster of neurons in the hypothalamus called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. This clock controls when you feel alert and when you feel sleepy, when hormones like cortisol and melatonin are released, even when your body temperature peaks. It's synchronized to the day-night cycle by light exposure. When you fly across time zones, you move your body faster than your internal clock can adjust, and the result is dysregulation. Jet lag affects more than just sleep. It impacts mood, digestion, immune function, and cognitive performance. Studies have shown that people with jet lag have slower reaction times, impaired decision-making, and increased irritability. You're operating in a state where your consciousness is out of sync with itself, getting signals from the body that contradict signals from the environment. It takes about a day per time zone crossed for the circadian rhythm to fully adjust. What jet lag reveals is that consciousness is not independent of time. Your brain is deeply embedded in cycles, and when those cycles are disrupted, your subjective experience changes. The altered state is subtle, not dramatic like a drug, but it's real and measurable. You're not fully yourself until your inner clock realigns with the outer world. Level 29, the closeness of oxytocin release. You hold a baby, you hug someone you love, you pet a dog and it looks up at you with trusting eyes. In these moments, a cascade of neurochemical changes occurs, centered around a hormone called oxytocin. Often called the love hormone or bonding hormone, oxytocin produces an altered state characterized by feelings of warmth, trust, connection, and reduced anxiety. Oxytocin is released by the hypothalamus and acts throughout the brain and body. It plays a crucial role in childbirth and breastfeeding, but it's also involved in social bonding, empathy, and the formation of trust. When oxytocin levels rise, people tend to feel more generous, more willing to cooperate, more attuned to the emotions of others. The boundaries between self and other soften. You feel safe, connected, part of something larger. This is why physical touch is so important for well-being. It's not just comforting in a vague sense. It literally changes your neurochemistry, shifting consciousness toward a state of openness and connection. Studies have shown that oxytocin can reduce activity in the amygdala, the brain's fear center, which is why you feel less anxious when you're with someone you trust. But oxytocin has a shadow side. It can also increase in-group favoritism and out-group suspicion. The same hormone that makes you feel bonded to your family or community can make you more defensive or hostile toward outsiders. The altered state of connection is not universal love. It's tribal, selective, designed by evolution to strengthen bonds within groups, sometimes at the expense of those outside. Understanding this complexity is important. Oxytocin is not simply good. It's a tool that shaped human social life, and like all tools, it has costs and benefits. Level 30, the release of crying. You've been holding it together all day, maybe all week. Then something happens, something small, a kind word, a sad song, and suddenly you're crying. The tears come, your breath hitches, and for a few minutes, you're not in control. This is often described as releasing emotion, and it is, in a very real sense, an altered state. Crying shifts how consciousness feels, often bringing a sense of relief, exhaustion, or clarity afterward. Emotional tears, distinct from the tears that lubricate your eyes or respond to irritation, contain higher levels of stress hormones and endorphins. The act of crying appears to help regulate emotional arousal, bringing you down from a heightened state. There's also a social component. Tears signal vulnerability and need to others, often eliciting comfort and support. In this way, crying is both an internal regulatory process and a social communication. During intense crying, your breathing pattern changes, becoming irregular and punctuated by sobs. This affects the balance of oxygen and carbon dioxide in your blood, which can create lightheadedness or a sense of detachment. Your attention narrows to the emotion you're feeling, and other concerns fade into the background. It's a state of emotional intensity where normal self-control is temporarily suspended. The aftermath of crying is often a shift toward calm. The storm has passed, your body's stress response begins to wind down, and the parasympathetic nervous system, responsible for rest and recovery, takes over. Many people report feeling drained but also lighter, as if something that was trapped has been released. The altered state of crying is not just about sadness. It's a complex physiological and emotional process that resets consciousness, allowing you to move forward. Level 31. The expansion of psilocybin. Psilocybin, the active compound in magic mushrooms, produces one of the most profound and studied altered states. People who take it report experiences that are difficult to put into words. The boundaries of the self dissolve. Ordinary objects become imbued with meaning. Colors are brighter. Patterns emerge and shift. There's often a sense of connection to everything, a feeling that you're part of a larger whole. And sometimes, especially at higher doses, there's an encounter with something that feels transcendent, mystical, beyond the ordinary categories of experience. Psilocybin works by binding to serotonin receptors, particularly the 5-HT2A receptor, which is densely distributed in areas of the brain involved in perception, cognition, and mood. Brain imaging studies show that psilocybin doesn't simply increase brain activity. In some ways, it decreases it, particularly in the default mode network, the brain's self-referential hub. This network is what maintains your sense of being a separate self, and when it quiets, the boundaries of that self can dissolve. What makes psilocybin particularly interesting is its potential for lasting change. Studies have shown that a single high-dose experience in a supportive setting can lead to significant reductions in depression and anxiety, sometimes lasting months or even years. People often describe the experience as one of the most meaningful of their lives, on par with the birth of a child or the death of a parent. The altered state is not just recreational, it can be transformative. But psilocybin is not without risks. The experience can be overwhelming, sometimes terrifying, especially if taken in an unsafe setting or by someone unprepared. There's also the risk of triggering latent psychological issues in vulnerable individuals. The altered state it produces is powerful, and power demands respect. Used carefully, with intention and support, it can open doors. Used recklessly, it can harm. Level 32, the Trance of Hypnosis. You're sitting in a chair, listening to a calm voice guiding you to relax. Your eyes close, your breathing slows. The voice suggests that your arm is becoming heavy, and it does. It suggests that you're somewhere else, and in a strange way, you are. This is hypnosis, an altered state of focused attention and heightened suggestibility. Despite its portrayal in popular culture, hypnosis is not mind control. It's a real, measurable state where consciousness becomes more receptive to suggestion. During hypnosis, brain imaging shows changes in activity patterns. The areas responsible for executive control and self-monitoring show reduced activity, while areas involved in focused attention show increased activity. You're deeply absorbed, less concerned with external stimuli or internal self-talk. This makes it easier to accept suggestions, to imagine scenarios vividly, to experience sensations that aren't objectively there. Hypnosis has been used therapeutically for pain management, anxiety, smoking cessation, and other issues. It's not a cure-all, and not everyone is equally hypnotizable, but for those who are, it can be a powerful tool. The altered state allows access to thoughts, memories, and responses that are normally outside conscious control. You can, for example, be hypnotized to feel less pain, and brain scans show that the pain centers of the brain actually become less active. The suggestion changes the experience. What hypnosis reveals is that consciousness is not a fixed observer, passively receiving reality. It's an active participant, constantly constructing experience based on expectations, beliefs, and context. Hypnosis simply makes that construction more explicit, showing how much of what you experience is shaped by the top-down signals your brain generates, not just the bottom-up input from your senses. Level 33, the Strangeness of Déjà Vu. You walk into a room you've never been in before, and suddenly you're overwhelmed by the feeling that you've experienced this exact moment before. Not just something similar, this exact configuration of sights, sounds, and sensations. This is déjà vu, French for already seen, and it's one of the most common and mysterious glitches in consciousness. Researchers believe déjà vu occurs when there's a brief miscommunication between the brain systems responsible for memory and perception. For a split second, the system that tags experiences as familiar fires before the system that creates the actual memory. The result is a feeling of familiarity without a corresponding memory, a recognition without content. It's an error, but a benign one, and it usually passes within seconds. Déjà vu is more common in young people and tends to decrease with age. It can be triggered by fatigue, stress, or certain medications. For most people, it's just a curiosity, a momentary disorientation. But for some people with epilepsy, particularly temporal lobe epilepsy, déjà vu can be a symptom of seizure activity, occurring more frequently and intensely. What makes déjà vu interesting as an altered state is that it reveals how much of your sense of reality is constructed by memory. You don't just perceive the present moment, you perceive it in the context of the past, and your brain is constantly checking, is this new or familiar? When that checking system glitches, you get a false positive, a feeling of familiarity that shouldn't be there. It's a small window into how consciousness stitches together perception and memory into a coherent sense of now. Level 34. The intensity of exercise-induced endorphins. Push your body hard enough, long enough, and chemistry shifts. We talked earlier about runner's high, but let's go deeper. Intense physical exertion triggers the release of endorphins, the body's natural opioids, along with endocannabinoids and other neurochemicals. The result is not just pain relief, but a genuine altered state where discomfort recedes, mood lifts, and a sense of well-being washes over you. Endorphins bind to the same receptors as morphine and other opioid drugs, blocking pain signals and creating feelings of pleasure. This is why people talk about being addicted to exercise. The altered state it produces can be genuinely rewarding, creating a motivation to keep pushing, to seek out that feeling again. Combined with the endocannabinoids, which add a sense of calm and reduced anxiety, intense exercise can shift consciousness into a state that's both energized and peaceful. But there's a paradox here. To reach this state, you have to go through significant discomfort. The first 20 minutes of a run, the burning in your muscles during a hard workout, these are not pleasant. The altered state is on the other side of that discomfort, and not everyone makes it there. This is why exercise is hard to maintain as a habit. The immediate experience is often negative, and the reward, the altered state, is delayed. What exercise-induced endorphins show is that the body has built-in systems for managing pain and effort, evolved to help you persist through physical challenges. The altered state is an incentive, the body's way of saying, keep going, this is good for you. And for many people, once they've experienced it regularly, it becomes something they crave, a natural high that's healthy, legal, and entirely under their own control. Level 35. The Otherworldliness of DMT. Dimethyltryptamine, or DMT, is often called the most powerful psychedelic known to humans. When smoked or vaporized, it takes effect within seconds. The world dissolves. You're catapulted into a space that feels more real than real, populated by entities, geometric patterns, impossible colors. Time stops making sense. And then, 5 to 15 minutes later, you're back, trying to make sense of what just happened. DMT is fascinating because it's endogenous, meaning your own body produces it, though in very small amounts. It's found in many plants and animals, and some researchers speculate it might play a role in dreaming or near-death experiences, though this remains controversial. What's clear is that when taken in larger amounts, it produces an altered state unlike anything else. People who've experienced high-dose DMT often struggle to describe it. The visuals are beyond anything possible in normal perception. Many report encountering entities, beings that seem intelligent, communicative, sometimes playful, sometimes serious. These encounters feel utterly real in the moment, which raises profound questions. Are these entities real in some sense? Are they aspects of your own mind, products of cultural expectations? There's no consensus. DMT also has a quality of timelessness. The experience feels like it lasts hours or even longer, though objectively it's only minutes. Upon returning, many people report a sense of awe, confusion, and sometimes frustration at the impossibility of translating the experience into language. DMT pushes the boundaries of what consciousness can be, showing that under the right chemical conditions, the mind can generate experiences that feel as real as or more real than everyday life. Level 36, the quiet of fasting. Go without food for a day, 2 days, longer, and consciousness begins to shift. The first hours are uncomfortable. Hunger pangs, irritability, difficulty concentrating. But if you push through, something changes. Hunger often fades. Energy returns, not the jittery energy of stimulants, but a calm, focused alertness. Mood stabilizes. Thoughts become clearer. This is the altered state of fasting, used for millennia in spiritual traditions and now being studied for its cognitive and health effects. When you fast, your body shifts from burning glucose to burning fat, producing molecules called ketones that the brain can use for fuel. This metabolic shift, called ketosis, is associated with changes in brain function. Many people report enhanced mental clarity, improved focus, and a sense of calm. There's also evidence that fasting increases production of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, a protein that supports neuron health and growth. Fasting also affects consciousness through its psychological dimensions. There's a sense of agency, of choosing to abstain, which can be empowering. There's also the experience of noticing how much of your day normally revolves around food. Without eating, you have more time, more attention, and often a heightened awareness of physical sensations. But fasting is not universally beneficial. For people with certain medical conditions or histories of disordered eating, it can be harmful. The altered state it produces is real, but it's not for everyone, and it needs to be approached with knowledge and caution. What it shows is that consciousness is tightly linked to metabolism. Change what you consume, and you change how you experience the world. Level 37, the softening of LSD. Lysergic acid diethylamide, better known as LSD or acid, is another classical psychedelic, similar to psilocybin, but with some important differences. An LSD experience typically lasts much longer, 8 to 12 hours, which means you're committing to an extended journey through altered consciousness. The effects are often described as having more clarity and less emotional weight than psilocybin, though this varies person to person. LSD, like psilocybin, works primarily through serotonin receptors and disrupts the default mode network. The boundaries of self soften, perception becomes fluid. You might see objects breathing, trails following movement, faces morphing. Thoughts become non-linear, jumping between ideas in ways that feel meaningful, even revelatory. There's often a sense of interconnectedness, of seeing patterns and relationships that are invisible in normal consciousness. One of the distinctive features of LSD is its effect on time perception. Users often report that time becomes elastic, stretching and contracting. A minute can feel like an hour, or an hour like a minute. This distortion can be disorienting, especially since the experience lasts so long. You might feel like you've been altered for days when it's only been a few hours. LSD played a significant role in the counterculture of the 1960s and has recently resurged in research settings for its potential therapeutic applications, particularly in treating anxiety, depression, and PTSD. Microdosing, taking very small amounts that don't produce full psychedelic effects, has also become popular as a way to potentially enhance creativity and focus. The altered state of LSD is powerful and long-lasting, which makes it both promising and demanding of respect. Level 38, the drowsiness of antihistamines. You take an allergy pill, and within an hour you're fighting to keep your eyes open. This is a common experience with first-generation antihistamines like diphenhydramine, found in Benadryl. While these drugs are designed to block histamine and reduce allergic symptoms, They also cross into the brain and cause sedation, producing a mild altered state of drowsiness and cognitive fog. Histamine in the brain plays a role in wakefulness and attention. When antihistamines block these receptors, the result is a decrease in alertness. Your thoughts slow down, concentration becomes difficult. You might feel disconnected, slightly dreamy, not quite present. It's not pleasant in the way that some altered states are, but it's definitely a shift in consciousness. Interestingly, some people use this sedating effect intentionally, taking antihistamines as a sleep aid. But it's not ideal for sleep quality. While it might help you fall asleep, it can disrupt the deeper stages of sleep and leave you groggy the next day. The altered state lingers, creating what's sometimes called a Benadryl hangover. What antihistamines show is that many common medications alter consciousness as a side effect. You take them for one reason, but they change how you think and feel in ways you might not anticipate. It's a reminder that consciousness is chemical, and any substance that affects the brain's chemistry will affect experience. The altered state might be mild and temporary, but it's real, and it's worth being aware of. Level 39. The stillness after yoga. You move through a series of postures, stretching, balancing, breathing deliberately. By the end of a yoga session, especially one that includes a long final relaxation, consciousness has shifted. Your body feels different, looser, more grounded. Your mind is quieter, less reactive. There's a sense of peace, of being settled into the present moment. This is the altered state that yoga cultivates, a combination of physical, mental, and breathing practices that together shift how you experience being alive. Yoga works through multiple mechanisms. The physical postures reduce tension in the body, which sends signals to the brain that it's safe to relax. The controlled. Breathing activates the parasympathetic nervous system, lowering heart rate and blood pressure. And the focused attention, moving from posture to posture with awareness, trains the mind to stay present rather than wandering into past or future. Research on yoga has shown measurable changes in brain function. Regular practitioners show increased activity in areas associated with attention and interoception, and decreased activity in areas associated with stress and anxiety. The altered state it produces is not dramatic, but it's consistent. You're still yourself, just calmer, more present, more connected to your body. What makes yoga interesting is that it's a practice. You don't do it once and achieve the altered state permanently. You cultivate it, session by session, building a capacity for this mode of consciousness that you can return to when you need it. It's an example of how altered states don't have to be exotic or extreme. They can be gentle, accessible, and integrated into everyday life. Level 40. The Buzz of Nicotine. You take a drag on a cigarette, a puff on a vape, or place a piece of nicotine gum in your mouth. Within seconds, you feel it. A brief rush, a sense of alertness, a slight lightness. This is nicotine, one of the world's most addictive substances and one that produces a quick, subtle altered state. Nicotine binds to acetylcholine receptors in the brain, triggering the release of several neurotransmitters, including dopamine, which is associated with pleasure and reward. The effect is stimulating but also calming, which is part of why people find it so appealing. It sharpens focus while reducing anxiety. It's a paradoxical state, both energizing and relaxing. But nicotine's effects are short-lived, and tolerance develops quickly. You need more to get the same feeling, and when you don't have it, withdrawal sets in. Irritability, difficulty concentrating, cravings. The altered state becomes something you need just to feel normal, which is the hallmark of addiction. What makes nicotine particularly insidious is how quickly it hooks you and how hard it is to quit. The altered state it produces is mild, not dramatic, but the neurochemical changes it causes make it one of the most dependence-forming substances known. Millions of people struggle with nicotine addiction, and it's estimated that tobacco use kills over 8 million people a year. The altered state is real, but the cost is enormous. Level 41. The derealization of extreme fatigue. You've been awake too long, far past when you should have slept. The world starts to feel strange, unreal, like you're watching it through a foggy window. This is derealization, a state where external reality feels distant, dreamlike, not quite solid. It's one of the altered states that extreme fatigue can produce, and while it's usually temporary, it's unsettling. Derealization is related to dissociation, a disconnection between consciousness and reality. When your brain is exhausted, it struggles to maintain the normal integration of sensory input and emotional response. The result is a kind of perceptual flattening. Colors might seem duller, sounds more muffled. You might feel like you're moving through a simulation rather than the real world. What's happening is that the brain, deprived of sleep, is conserving energy by reducing processing in some areas. The regions responsible for integrating information and creating a coherent sense of presence become less active. You're still awake, but barely, and consciousness is operating in a degraded mode. Derealization can also occur during panic attacks or as a symptom of certain psychological conditions, but fatigue-induced derealization usually resolves with sleep. Once you've rested, the world snaps back into focus and the altered state passes. It's a reminder that consciousness has minimum requirements. Push too hard without rest, and the system starts to falter, producing experiences that are alien and disorienting. Level 42, the intoxication of alcohol's peak. We talked earlier about alcohol's initial warmth, but let's follow the curve further. As you drink more, the altered state deepens. Inhibitions lower further. Coordination becomes impaired. Speech slurs. Judgment suffers. This is the state most people think of when they think of being drunk, and it's a complex mixture of cognitive impairment and subjective pleasure, at least up to a point. At moderate to high levels, alcohol significantly disrupts brain function. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for decision-making and impulse control, is suppressed. The cerebellum, which coordinates movement, is impaired. Memory formation is disrupted, which is why people often have gaps in their recollection of nights they drank heavily. Despite these impairments, the subjective experience can still feel good. Social barriers dissolve, worries fade. You feel confident, carefree. But there's a tipping point. Drink too much, and the pleasant altered state becomes dysphoric. Nausea, dizziness, loss of motor control. The room spins. You might vomit or pass out. At very high doses, alcohol can suppress the brainstem functions that control breathing and heart rate, leading to death. The substance that started as a social lubricant becomes a poison. Alcohol is also remarkable for how normalized it is. Despite being a powerful psychoactive drug with significant risks, it's legal, widely available, and central to many cultures' social practices. The altered state it produces is familiar to billions of people, but that familiarity can obscure the real dangers. Alcohol's effects are dose-dependent, context-dependent, and individual-dependent, and navigating them responsibly requires awareness and self-knowledge. Level 43, the intensity of Salvia divinorum. Salvia divinorum, a plant native to Mexico, produces one of the strangest altered states known. Unlike most psychedelics which work through serotonin, salvia acts on kappa opioid receptors, creating an experience that's often described as deeply disorienting, sometimes terrifying, and profoundly strange. Users report feeling like they've become objects, merged with their surroundings, or been transported to entirely alien dimensions. The effects of salvia come on almost instantly and are gone within 10 to 20 minutes, but those minutes can feel like an eternity. There's often a sense of being pulled or stretched, of gravity shifting, of losing all sense of who or where you are. Many people report that it's not enjoyable, not in the way other psychedelics can be. It's more like being subjected to forces beyond your control. What makes salvia interesting is its utter otherness. While other psychedelics often enhance or distort normal perception, salvia seems to replace it entirely with something completely unfamiliar. This has led some researchers to study it as a potential probe into the nature of consciousness itself, a way to see what happens when the normal structure is radically disrupted. Salvia was legal in many places for years, partly because it's so unpleasant that it never became popular recreationally. But it's increasingly being restricted. The altered state it produces is powerful and bizarre, and while some people find value in it, many others find it simply overwhelming. It's a reminder that altered states are not all about bliss or insight. Some are just strange, challenging, and hard to integrate. Level 44. The Calm of Benzodiazepines. Benzodiazepines, drugs like Valium, Xanax, and Ativan, are prescribed for anxiety, insomnia, and seizures. They work by enhancing GABA, the brain's main inhibitory neurotransmitter, creating a state of calm, relaxation, and reduced anxiety. For people suffering from panic or severe anxiety, this altered state can be a relief, a break from the constant tension. The effect is not subtle. Benzodiazepines quiet the mind, slow racing thoughts, relax tense muscles. The world feels less threatening. Worries that seemed overwhelming become manageable or disappear entirely. For a few hours, consciousness shifts into a mode where fear and stress have less grip. But benzodiazepines are not without problems. Tolerance develops quickly, meaning you need more to get the same effect. Dependence can set in within weeks, and withdrawal is notoriously difficult, sometimes dangerous. The altered state they produce, while pleasant and useful in the short term, becomes a trap if used long term. There's also the issue of cognitive impairment. Benzodiazepines slow reaction time, impair memory, and reduce coordination. You're calm, but you're also less capable. And there's a risk of combining them with other depressants like alcohol, which can lead to respiratory depression and death. Benzodiazepines are a tool, and like many tools that alter consciousness, they're powerful and require careful use. The altered state of calm they produce can be genuinely helpful, but it comes with costs that need to be weighed and managed. Level 45. The immersion of virtual reality. You put on a headset, and suddenly you're somewhere else. You're standing on the edge of a cliff looking down at a valley far below. And even though you know intellectually that you're in a room, your body reacts. Your heart races. You feel vertigo. This is virtual reality, and it produces an altered state where the brain's sense of presence is hijacked by artificial stimuli. VR works by providing your senses with information that's consistent enough to trick your brain into treating it as real. The visuals track with your head movements, the audio shifts based on your position, and your brain, which is built to construct a model of reality from sensory input, accepts the simulation. The result is a genuine sense of being there in the virtual space, even though you're not. This altered state has fascinating implications. VR is being used therapeutically to treat phobias, allowing people to confront fears in a controlled environment. It's being used for pain management, immersing patients in calming environments to distract from physical discomfort. And it's raising questions about the nature of experience itself. If a virtual experience can feel as real as a physical one, what does that say about the reality we normally inhabit? VR also has risks. Prolonged use can lead to disorientation, motion sickness, and a strange feeling of detachment when you remove the headset. Some users report that the real world feels less vivid after extensive time in VR. The altered state is powerful, and as the technology improves, the line between virtual and real will blur further. We're entering territory where consciousness can be shaped by synthetic environments, and the implications are both exciting and unsettling. Level 46. The openness of psilocybin microdosing. Not all psychedelic use is about full, intense experiences. Microdosing involves taking a very small amount of a substance, typically psilocybin or LSD, too small to produce obvious perceptual changes, but potentially large enough to subtly shift consciousness. People who microdose report increased creativity, improved mood, better focus, and enhanced emotional openness. The altered state here is subtle. You're not hallucinating or losing touch with reality. You might not even be consciously aware that anything has changed. But over the course of hours, you might notice that you're more patient, more curious, more willing to engage with difficult thoughts or tasks. Colors might seem slightly more vibrant. Conversations might feel more meaningful. The science on microdosing is still emerging. Some studies suggest benefits, while others find little difference from placebo. This raises interesting questions. If people believe they're microdosing and experience positive changes, does it matter whether those changes are pharmacological or placebo-driven? The altered state might be as much about expectation and intention as about the substance itself. What microdosing represents is an attempt to access the benefits of psychedelics without the intensity and time commitment of a full experience. It's consciousness optimization, a way to fine-tune your baseline state. Whether it works as advertised is still being determined, but the interest itself tells us something about how people are increasingly thinking about consciousness as something that can and should be managed and enhanced. Level 47. The drowning sensation of sleep paralysis. You wake up, but you can't move. Your eyes are open, you're conscious, but your body is frozen. And then you sense it, a presence in the room, a weight on your chest, a figure standing in the shadows. You try to scream, but no sound comes out. This is sleep paralysis, one of the most terrifying altered states a person can experience. During REM sleep, when most dreaming occurs, your body is temporarily paralyzed to prevent you from acting out your dreams. Sleep paralysis happens when you wake up while this paralysis is still active. You're conscious, but the mechanism that keeps you still during dreams hasn't disengaged yet. The result is a feeling of being trapped in your own body. The hallucinations that often accompany sleep paralysis are likely due to the fact that your brain is still partially in a dream state. The sense of a malevolent presence is so common across cultures that it's been interpreted as demons, ghosts, or alien abductions. But it's a product of the brain, a mismatch between systems that normally don't overlap. Sleep paralysis usually lasts only a few seconds to a couple of minutes, though it feels much longer. Once you fully wake, the paralysis lifts and you can move again. Understanding what's happening can make it less frightening, but that understanding doesn't always help in the moment. The altered state is intensely real, and the fear it produces is genuine, even though the threat is not. Level 48. The euphoria of sexual climax. During orgasm, the brain releases a flood of neurochemicals, dopamine, oxytocin, endorphins, and others. Blood flow shifts, heart rate spikes, breathing quickens, and for a few seconds, consciousness shifts into a state of intense pleasure, focus, and release. This is one of the most universally experienced altered states, yet it's rarely discussed in those terms. Brain imaging during orgasm shows a pattern of activity unlike any other state. Some areas light up, particularly those involved in reward and emotion. Other areas, including parts of the prefrontal cortex responsible for judgment and self-control, shut down. This combination, heightened reward activity and reduced inhibition, creates the subjective experience of letting go, of being fully in the moment without thought or worry. After orgasm, many people experience a period of calm, sometimes called the refractory period, where the body and mind relax deeply. Prolactin is released, contributing to feelings of satiation and contentment. Some people become sleepy. The altered state shifts from intensity to tranquility. What's interesting is how variable this state can be. For some, orgasm is brief and purely physical. For others, especially in contexts of deep emotional connection, it can feel transcendent, almost spiritual. The neurochemistry is the same, but the subjective experience varies wildly based on context, relationship, and mindset. It's a reminder that altered states are not just about biology. They're about meaning, interpretation, and the stories we tell about our experiences. Level 49. The spaciousness of ketamine. Ketamine, originally developed as an anesthetic, has become a subject of intense interest for its unique effects on consciousness. At lower doses, it produces a dreamlike state where you feel detached from your body and surroundings. At higher doses, it can induce what's called the K-hole, a profoundly dissociative state where you lose all sense of self and environment, experiencing only abstract patterns, sensations, or voids. Ketamine works primarily by blocking NMDA receptors, which are involved in learning, memory, and perception. This disrupts the normal flow of glutamate, the brain's main excitatory neurotransmitter. The result is a state where consciousness becomes unmoored from sensory input. You're awake, but not in the usual way. You're aware, but of what exactly is hard to say. Recently, ketamine has been approved for treatment-resistant depression, administered in controlled medical settings. The altered state it produces seems to create a window where the brain can reset certain patterns, allowing people to break out of rigid, depressive thinking. The mechanism is still being studied, but the effects can be rapid and dramatic, with some people experiencing relief from symptoms within hours. Ketamine also has a long history of recreational use, and like many dissociatives, it can be both fascinating and disorienting. The altered state is not for everyone. Some people find it insightful, a way to see consciousness from a radically different perspective. Others find it uncomfortable, too alien, too disconnected. As with all powerful substances, the line between therapeutic and harmful use depends on dose, setting, and individual vulnerability. Level 50. The groundedness of barefoot walking. Take off your shoes and walk on grass, sand, or soil. Feel the texture beneath your feet, the coolness, the slight give of the earth. This simple act, walking barefoot on natural ground, can shift consciousness in a subtle but real way. Your attention is drawn to the sensations in your feet. Your gait changes. There's a sense of connection, of being grounded, literally and metaphorically. Some people call this earthing or grounding, and while there are claims about electrical charges and health benefits that remain scientifically unproven, the subjective experience is real. Walking barefoot engages your body in a way that's different from walking in shoes. Your feet have thousands of nerve endings, and when they are in direct contact with varied surfaces, they send a rich stream of information to your brain. This heightened sensory input shifts attention. You become more present, more aware of your body moving through space. The mind, which might have been wandering or worrying, settles into the rhythm of walking and the texture of the ground. It's a form of mindfulness, achieved not through sitting meditation, but through direct physical engagement with the environment. The altered state here is gentle, barely noticeable unless you're paying attention. But it's part of a broader truth. Consciousness is shaped by how you engage with the world. Small changes in behavior, like walking barefoot, can create small changes in awareness, and those small changes, accumulated over time, can shift your baseline state in meaningful ways. Level 51. The trance of prayer or chanting. In religious and spiritual traditions around the world, repetitive prayer or chanting is used to induce altered states. Whether it's a rosary, a mantra, or a sung hymn, the practice involves repeating sounds or phrases rhythmically, often for extended periods. This repetition has a hypnotic quality, drawing consciousness into a focused, meditative state. The mechanism is similar to drumming. The repetitive auditory input, especially when combined with rhythmic breathing, can entrain brain waves. The constant repetition also occupies the linguistic centers of the brain, leaving less room for the usual stream of discursive thought. What emerges is a state of calm, focus, and sometimes a sense of connection to something larger. Brain imaging of people engaged in prayer or meditation shows reduced activity in the default mode network and increased activity in areas associated with attention and emotional regulation. Subjectively, people report feeling peaceful, connected, sometimes experiencing a sense of the divine or transcendent. The altered state is not just cognitive, it's deeply emotional, often accompanied by feelings of love, awe, or reverence. What makes this interesting is that the practice itself, the act of repeating sounds or words, seems to be more important than the specific content. Different traditions use different languages, different phrases, but the structure is the same. The altered state emerges from the form of the practice, not just the beliefs associated with it. This suggests that consciousness can be shaped through technique, through how you use attention and sound, independent of what you believe. Level 52. The delirium of high fever. We touched on fever dreams earlier, but at very high temperatures, consciousness can shift into something more severe, delirium. This is not just strange dreams, it's a waking state of confusion, disorientation, and sometimes hallucination. You might not know where you are, who you're with, or even who you are. Speech becomes incoherent, behavior becomes erratic. Delirium occurs when the brain is stressed beyond its capacity to maintain normal function. High fever, infection, dehydration, or metabolic imbalances can all trigger it. The brain's ability to integrate information, to create a coherent narrative of reality, breaks down. What emerges is a fractured, unstable consciousness, where the boundaries between thought, perception, and memory collapse. This is a dangerous, altered state. Unlike most of the states we've discussed, delirium is a medical emergency. It signals that something is seriously wrong with the body, and it needs immediate attention. The experience is often frightening for the person going through it and for those watching, as the person they know seems to have disappeared, replaced by someone confused and unreachable. Delirium shows the fragility of consciousness. It doesn't take much: a few degrees of temperature, an imbalance in electrolytes, and the system that creates your sense of self and reality can fall apart. When the underlying cause is treated, consciousness usually returns to normal, but the experience leaves a mark. It's a vivid reminder that the clarity and coherence you take for granted are not guaranteed. They're the product of a complex, delicate system that can be disrupted. Level 53. The Focus of Adderall. Adderall, a stimulant commonly prescribed for ADHD, is also widely used off-label by students and professionals seeking enhanced focus and productivity. The drug increases levels of dopamine and norepinephrine in the brain, creating a state of heightened alertness, sustained attention, and reduced distractibility. For people with ADHD, it can be life-changing, allowing them to focus in ways that feel impossible otherwise. For people without ADHD, it can feel like a superpower, a way to work for hours without fatigue or distraction. The altered state Adderall produces is one of intense mental energy. Tasks that would normally feel boring or overwhelming become manageable, even enjoyable. You can sit down and write for 8 hours straight, study without your mind wandering, push through fatigue. But there are costs. The drug suppresses appetite, disrupts sleep, and can create anxiety or irritability. And when it wears off, there's often a crash, a period of exhaustion, and low mood. There's also the risk of dependence and abuse. The state Adderall produces is so effective for productivity that it's easy to rely on it, to feel like you can't function without it. Tolerance develops, meaning you need more to get the same effect. And at high doses, Adderall can cause serious cardiovascular and psychological problems. What Adderall represents is part of a broader trend toward cognitive enhancement, the use of substances to optimize mental performance. The altered state it produces is not about escape or recreation. It's about functioning better, achieving more, meeting the demands of a world that increasingly requires sustained focus and output. But this comes with ethical and health questions. What are the long-term effects? Is it fair in competitive environments? What happens to people who can't access or tolerate these substances? The altered state is useful, but it's not free. Level 54. The Transcendence of Ayahuasca. Ayahuasca is a brew made from plants native to the Amazon, used for centuries in indigenous shamanic practices. It contains DMT, but unlike smoked DMT, which is broken down quickly by the stomach, ayahuasca includes an MAOI inhibitor that allows the DMT to reach the brain when consumed orally. The result is an experience that lasts several hours, often involving intense visions, emotional purging, and encounters with what many describe as spirits or teachers. The ayahuasca experience is not easy. It often begins with nausea and vomiting, which is considered part of the purging process. Then, the visions come. People report seeing geometric patterns, jungle landscapes, animals, humanoid beings. There's often a sense of being taught, of receiving information or insight. Emotionally, the experience can be overwhelming, bringing up buried trauma, grief, fear, but also love, gratitude, and awe. What makes ayahuasca different from other psychedelics is the cultural and ceremonial context. Traditionally, it's taken with a shaman guiding the experience, singing icaros, healing songs, and providing a container for the journey. This structure seems to matter. People who take ayahuasca in ceremonial settings often report more positive, meaningful experiences than those who take it recreationally. Ayahuasca is being studied for its potential to treat addiction, depression, and PTSD. The altered state it produces is intense and often difficult, but many people describe it as one of the most important experiences of their lives. It's not about feeling good. It's about confronting yourself, processing buried emotions, and sometimes touching something that feels sacred. The state demands courage, preparation, and respect. Level 55, the horror of a bad trip. Not all altered states are positive or neutral. Sometimes, especially with psychedelics, things go wrong. A bad trip is an experience of overwhelming fear, paranoia, or psychological distress. The walls close in. You're convinced you're dying, going insane, or trapped forever. Time stretches out unbearably. Every thought spirals into catastrophe. This is one of the most challenging altered states a person can face. Bad trips can happen for many reasons: too high a dose, a stressful environment, a fragile psychological state going in, or sometimes for no clear reason at all. The substance amplifies whatever's present, and if there's fear or anxiety, it can become all-consuming. The usual mechanisms for self-soothing don't work. You can't think your way out. You're stuck in the experience until the substance wears off. What makes bad trips particularly difficult is the loss of control. You know intellectually that the substance will wear off, that you're not actually dying. But in the moment, that knowledge doesn't help. The altered state is too powerful. Your consciousness is flooded with terror, and all you can do is endure. Interestingly, some people report that bad trips, while horrible during the experience, lead to important insights afterward. Facing that level of fear and coming out the other side can build resilience, clarify priorities, or expose psychological issues that need attention. But this doesn't make the experience any less difficult. A bad trip is a reminder that altered states are not always benign. They can be destabilizing, traumatic, and harmful, especially without proper support and preparation. Level 56, the compassion of metta meditation. Metta, or loving-kindness meditation, is a practice from Buddhist traditions where you systematically cultivate feelings of compassion and goodwill toward yourself and others. You start by directing kind wishes toward yourself. May I be happy. May I be healthy. May I be safe. Then you extend those wishes to loved ones, then to neutral people, then even to people you have difficulties with, and finally to all beings. The altered state that emerges from metta practice is one of emotional warmth and openness. As you repeat the phrases and call to mind different people, your emotional tone shifts, defensiveness softens, resentment loosens. A sense of connection and care arises, not just for the specific people you're thinking of, but as a general orientation toward the world. Brain imaging of experienced metta practitioners shows increased activity in areas associated with empathy and emotional processing. There's also evidence that regular practice leads to lasting changes in how people relate to others, making them more patient, more generous, more willing to help. The altered state becomes a trait. What's interesting is that metta doesn't require believing anything. You don't have to believe in karma or reincarnation or any specific philosophy. You just have to do the practice, repeat the words, generate the intention, and the emotional shift follows. Consciousness changes through use, through how you direct attention and what you rehearse in your mind. Metta is a technology for shaping consciousness toward kindness, and like any technology, it works if you use it consistently. Level 57, the dread of anticipatory anxiety. Sometimes the altered state is not about what's happening, but what you think is going to happen. Anticipatory anxiety is the dread that builds before a feared event. A presentation, a medical procedure, a difficult conversation. Your mind races through worst-case scenarios. Your heart pounds. Your stomach churns. You're not in danger now, but your consciousness is already living the imagined future, and it feels terrible. This is a state where thought hijacks physiology. Your brain's prediction machinery, which is usually useful, is generating dire forecasts, and your body is responding as if those forecasts are real. The altered state is one of hyperarousal and negative rumination, a feedback loop where anxious thoughts create physical sensations which reinforce the anxious thoughts. What makes anticipatory anxiety challenging is that it's often disproportionate to the actual threat. The event you're dreading might not be that bad or might not happen at all, but the altered state of anxiety is very real and very uncomfortable. You're suffering now because of a story about the future. Breaking the cycle requires interrupting the loop, either by changing the thoughts, grounding yourself in the present moment, or addressing the physical symptoms directly through breathing or movement. The altered state is powerful, but it's also, in a sense, optional. You're creating it through the predictions and interpretations your mind is making. And with awareness and practice, you can learn to step out of it, to recognize it as a state rather than as reality. Level 58, the renewal of forest bathing. In Japan, there's a practice called Shinrin-yoku, or forest bathing, which involves spending time in nature, particularly forests, with a focus on sensory immersion. You're not hiking with a destination in mind. You're simply being present among the trees, breathing the air, listening to the sounds, noticing the light and shadows. This practice produces a gentle altered state, one characterized by reduced stress, improved mood, and a sense of connection to the natural world. Research has shown that time in nature lowers cortisol levels, reduces blood pressure, and enhances immune function. Some of this is due to phytoncides, compounds released by trees that have antimicrobial properties and may affect the nervous system. But much of it is psychological. Nature provides a break from the constant stimulation and demands of modern life. Your attention softens. The tight focus required for screens and tasks relaxes into a more diffuse, receptive awareness. The altered state of forest bathing is not dramatic. You don't lose yourself or have profound visions. But there's a quality of restoration, a sense that something is being replenished. The nervous system downregulates. The mind stops churning. And many people report a feeling that's hard to articulate, a sense of belonging, of being part of something larger and older than themselves. This is consciousness shaped by environment. Change where you are, what you're surrounded by, and your experience shifts. The altered state is accessible, requiring no drugs, no training, just time and attention in a place that allows you to slow down and be present. Level 59. The compulsion of addiction. Addiction is, in many ways, an altered state that's become chronic. The substance or behavior hijacks the brain's reward system, creating a state where cravings dominate consciousness. Everything else, relationships, responsibilities, health, fades into the background. The only thing that matters is getting and using the substance or engaging in the behavior. Neurologically, addiction involves changes in dopamine signaling and in the prefrontal cortex, which governs decision-making and impulse control. The brain adapts to the repeated presence of the substance, requiring more to achieve the same effect and generating withdrawal symptoms when it's absent. The result is a state where the person feels compelled to continue, even when they want to stop, even when the consequences are devastating. The altered state of addiction is not pleasurable, despite what outsiders might think. It's a state of constant craving, anxiety, and shame. The highs become less intense and the lows become deeper. The person is trapped in a cycle that's incredibly difficult to break without help. What makes addiction so challenging is that it changes consciousness at a fundamental level. The brain rewires itself around the substance or behavior. Recovery requires not just stopping the use, but rebuilding new patterns, new ways of experiencing pleasure and managing stress. It's a long, difficult process, and relapse is common. The altered state of addiction is one of the most destructive that consciousness can enter, and escaping it requires tremendous courage, support, and time. Level 60. The awareness of mindfulness meditation. Mindfulness meditation is the practice of paying attention to the present moment without judgment. You might focus on the breath, on sensations in the body, on sounds, or on thoughts and emotions as they arise. The goal is not to empty the mind, but to observe it, to become aware of what's happening without getting caught up in it. The altered state that mindfulness cultivates is one of meta-awareness, a consciousness of consciousness itself. You're still thinking and feeling, but you're also watching the process. There's a sense of space between you and your experiences. Thoughts are not you. They're events that arise and pass. Emotions are not facts. They're sensations that come and go. Research on mindfulness meditation has exploded in recent decades, showing benefits for stress reduction, emotional regulation, focus, and even immune function. Long-term practitioners show structural changes in the brain, particularly in areas associated with attention, self-awareness, and compassion. The practice doesn't just create temporary altered states, it changes the baseline, making consciousness more stable, more flexible, more responsive rather than reactive. What's powerful about mindfulness is its simplicity and accessibility. You don't need equipment, substances, or special circumstances. You just need to sit, pay attention, and return your focus when it wanders, which it will, constantly. The altered state emerges from this repetitive training of attention, a gradual shift in how you relate to your own mind. And that shift, practiced consistently, can fundamentally change what it's like to be you. Level 61, the paradox of ego death. At high doses of psychedelics, some people experience what's called ego death, a state where the sense of being a separate self dissolves completely. You don't lose consciousness, but you lose the boundary between self and world. There's no you observing the experience. There's just experience itself, vast, undifferentiated, sometimes blissful, sometimes terrifying. Ego death is paradoxical. How can you experience the absence of yourself? Who's there to notice that you're gone? These are not just philosophical puzzles. They point to something genuine about the structure of consciousness. The self is not a thing. It's a process, a construction, and under the right conditions, the construction can be temporarily dismantled. People who have experienced ego death often describe it as one of the most profound moments of their lives. Some call it spiritual, mystical, a glimpse into the true nature of reality. Others describe it as deeply disorienting, a loss of all anchors. When the self returns, as it always does, the person is often left with a sense of awe and confusion. What was that? Who am I if I can disappear like that? From a neuroscience perspective, ego death seems to involve the disruption of the default mode network, the brain's self-referential hub. When this network goes quiet, the narrative of I that normally runs in the background stops. What remains is raw awareness without an owner. The altered state is not just a change in the contents of consciousness, it's a change in its structure, a glimpse into what consciousness might be without the self. Level 62. The liminal space of dawn. There's a particular quality to consciousness in the early morning, just before dawn. The world is quiet. Most people are still asleep. There's a sense of in-betweenness, of standing at the threshold between night and day. If you wake and sit in this liminal time, consciousness often feels different from its usual daytime mode, softer, more open, less defined. This is partly physiological. Cortisol levels begin to rise in preparation for waking, but you're still riding the tail end of sleep's neurochemistry. It's also contextual. The absence of noise, activity, and demands creates space. Your mind hasn't yet engaged with the day's concerns. There's a stillness, a receptivity. Many spiritual and contemplative traditions emphasize practice at dawn, and this is not arbitrary. The altered state that's available at this time is conducive to meditation, reflection, and creativity. Consciousness is awake, but not yet fully armored, not yet caught up in the momentum of doing. There's a quality of possibility, of freshness. The liminal space of dawn is a reminder that consciousness is not constant throughout the day. It has rhythms, textures, moments when it's more pliable or more rigid. Learning to recognize these rhythms, to work with them rather than against them, is part of understanding how consciousness operates and how to navigate it skillfully. Level 63. The dissociation of trauma response. During or immediately after a traumatic event, consciousness can split. You might feel like you're watching what's happening from outside your body, as if it's happening to someone else. Emotions are dampened or absent. Time distorts. This is dissociation, a protective altered state that the mind enters when reality becomes unbearable. Dissociation is adaptive in the moment. It allows you to continue functioning when full engagement with the horror of the situation would be overwhelming. But when it persists, when it becomes a habitual response to stress, it's maladaptive. You're disconnected from your own life, numb, unable to fully feel or process emotions. Trauma-related dissociation is one of the most challenging altered states to address therapeutically. The person is stuck between two modes, unable to fully return to normal consciousness, but also unable to process the trauma that triggered the dissociation in the first place. Treatment often involves carefully titrated exposure, helping the person gradually reconnect with their body, their emotions, and their memories in a way that doesn't re-traumatize them. What dissociation reveals is that consciousness has emergency protocols, ways of protecting itself when the system is overwhelmed. These protocols can save you in the moment, but they can also trap you in a state that's no longer serving you. The challenge is learning to feel safe enough to let go of the protection to allow consciousness to reintegrate. Level 64. The mystery of near-death experiences. People who come close to death sometimes report profound experiences. They describe leaving their bodies, moving through tunnels toward light, encountering deceased loved ones, feeling overwhelming peace and love. These are near-death experiences, or NDEs, and they're one of the most controversial and mysterious altered states. Skeptics argue that NDEs are hallucinations produced by a dying brain, the result of oxygen deprivation, endorphin release, or the chaotic firing of neurons as systems shut down. Believers argue that NDEs are evidence of consciousness existing beyond the brain, glimpses of an afterlife or a spiritual dimension. The truth is, we don't know. What's clear is that NDEs are real experiences. The people who have them are profoundly affected. Many report reduced fear of death, increased compassion, and a sense that life has deeper meaning. Brain imaging and physiological studies have tried to identify correlates, but the conditions under which NDEs occur make rigorous study difficult. NDEs sit at the intersection of consciousness, mortality, and belief. They challenge materialist views of the mind while resisting easy spiritual explanations. The altered state they represent is liminal, occurring at the boundary of life and death, and perhaps because of that, they carry a weight and significance that other altered states don't. They force us to confront fundamental questions about what consciousness is and whether it continues when the body dies. Level 65. The clarity of sobriety after addiction. For someone who's been trapped in active addiction, sobriety is itself an altered state. After months or years of consciousness being dominated by cravings, by the cycle of using and withdrawing, the experience of being clean can feel strange and new. The fog lifts. Emotions, which may have been numbed or distorted, return with intensity. The world becomes vivid again, sometimes overwhelmingly so. Early sobriety is challenging partly because consciousness has to relearn how to function without the substance. The brain has adapted to its presence, and now it has to adapt to its absence. This takes time. In the early weeks and months, people often feel raw, vulnerable, hypersensitive. It's an altered state in the sense that it's not the drugged state, but it's also not yet a stable baseline. As time passes, consciousness begins to stabilize. The acute cravings fade. Cognitive function improves. Emotional regulation becomes easier. And many people in long-term recovery describe a sense of clarity and presence that they never had, even before addiction. Sobriety becomes not just the absence of substances, but a positive state, a way of engaging with life that's conscious, intentional, and awake. This is a reminder that altered states are not just about substances or practices, they're also about the absence of something that was distorting consciousness. Removing the distortion is itself a shift, and for people emerging from addiction, it's a profound one. The altered state of sobriety is hard-won, fragile, and precious. Level 66. The stillness of death's proximity. When you're close to someone who's dying, or when you yourself are facing mortality, consciousness shifts. The usual concerns, the worries about status or money or daily hassles recede. What's left is something more fundamental: presence, connection, the preciousness of simply being alive. This is the altered state that proximity to death can induce, a clarifying, quieting perspective shift. Hospice workers, doctors, and people who face terminal diagnoses often describe this change. Priorities rearrange themselves. Things that seemed important become irrelevant. Things that were taken for granted, a conversation, a sunset, the touch of a hand, become suffused with meaning. There's often a sense of time slowing down, of each moment carrying more weight. This altered state is not always pleasant. It can be marked by grief, fear, and sadness, but it also has a quality of truth. The awareness of mortality strips away pretense and reveals what actually matters. Consciousness becomes simpler, more direct, less cluttered by the stories and projections that usually dominate. Contemplative traditions have long recognized this. Memento mori, remember you will die, is not meant to be morbid. It's meant to wake you up, to shift consciousness toward presence and gratitude. The altered state that death's proximity induces is a teacher, and while it's often uncomfortable, the lessons it offers are among the most important you can learn. Level 67. The integration after a retreat. You spend a week or 10 days or a month in silence on a meditation retreat. The days are simple: sitting, walking, eating, sleeping, all done in silence with full attention. By the end, consciousness has shifted. The usual mental chatter is quieter, awareness is sharper, there's a sense of spaciousness, of being settled into the present moment. But then you leave. You return to the noise and demands of everyday life, and the altered state begins to fade. This is the integration phase, and it's one of the most important and challenging aspects of intensive practice. The question is, can you bring what you've learned back into your life? Can the shift in consciousness become more than a temporary altered state? Integration requires intention. It's easy for the clarity and calm of retreat to evaporate within days or weeks. The practices that supported the altered state, the silence, the simplicity, the community, are no longer there. You have to find ways to maintain the shift in a context that's not designed for it. Many people who do regular retreats describe a rhythm of going deep, integrating, then going deep again. The retreats create temporary altered states that, over time and with repeated exposure, shift the baseline. The altered becomes less altered, more normal. This is the long-term project of contemplative practice, not just accessing different states, but gradually transforming consciousness itself. Level 68. The Confusion of Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's disease progressively dismantles consciousness. Memory fades first, then language, then the ability to recognize loved ones, and finally the ability to care for oneself. The person is still there, still conscious, but their consciousness is fragmenting, losing coherence, losing the threads that connect moments into a continuous self. For the person with Alzheimer's, the altered state is one of increasing disorientation and confusion. The past and present blur. Familiar places become strange. People become unrecognizable. There's often fear, frustration, and a sense of being lost. In the later stages, even basic awareness of the body and environment may fade. For caregivers and loved ones, watching this happen is heartbreaking. The person they knew seems to be disappearing, replaced by someone who's present, but not quite there. It raises profound questions about identity, about what it means to be a person, about where consciousness goes when the structure that supports it is eroding. Alzheimer's is a reminder of how dependent consciousness is on the brain's physical structure. When neurons die, when connections are severed, consciousness changes. The self, which feels so solid, so permanent, is revealed to be fragile, contingent on biology. It's a devastating altered state, one that nobody would choose, and it's a stark reminder of the impermanence of everything we are. Level 69. The peace of acceptance. Acceptance is not resignation. It's not giving up or pretending things are fine when they're not. It's a shift in consciousness where you stop fighting reality and allow it to be what it is. This is an altered state that can emerge through practice, through suffering, or sometimes spontaneously, and it's characterized by a deep sense of peace. When you're in resistance, consciousness is tense, constricted, at war with what's happening. You're constantly saying, "This shouldn't be this way." That resistance creates suffering on top of whatever pain is already present. Acceptance is the release of that resistance. You're still in pain, but you're not fighting it. You're allowing it, making space for it, and in that space, something softens. This is the core insight of many contemplative traditions. Suffering is not just about the circumstances of your life, but about your relationship to those circumstances. Acceptance changes the relationship. It doesn't change the facts, but it changes your consciousness of the facts, and that change can be profound. The altered state of acceptance is not passive. It's active, engaged, clear-eyed. You see things as they are, including the pain, and you choose to be present with it rather than running away. And paradoxically, this often creates the conditions for change. When you stop fighting, energy that was locked in resistance becomes available for action. Acceptance is not the end. It's the ground from which something new can grow. Level 70. The warmth of empathy. You see someone in pain, and something in you shifts. You feel their suffering as if it were your own. This is empathy, and while it's often thought of as an emotional response, it's also an altered state of consciousness. Your sense of separation from the other person softens. Their experience becomes, in a limited but real way, your experience. Empathy involves mirror neurons, brain systems that fire both when you perform an action and when you observe someone else performing it. When you see someone smile, parts of your brain that control smiling activate. When you see someone in pain, your pain centers light up. You're simulating their experience in your own neural systems, and this creates the feeling of connection. But empathy is not automatic or universal. It can be blocked by prejudice, by fear, by emotional exhaustion, and it can be overwhelming, especially for people who are highly empathic. Feeling everyone's pain can be debilitating. This is why some traditions distinguish between empathy and compassion. Empathy is feeling with, compassion is caring about, with enough distance to maintain balance and act skillfully. The altered state of empathy is one of connection, of recognizing shared humanity. It's the basis for moral behavior, for cooperation, for the social bonds that make community possible. And it's something that can be cultivated. Practices like meta-meditation increase empathy. So does exposure to diverse perspectives and stories. The more you understand others' inner lives, the more your consciousness extends beyond the boundaries of your own skull. Level 71. The Bliss of Samadhi. In deep meditation, some practitioners report entering states of profound concentration and bliss called samadhi or jhana. Consciousness becomes extremely focused, absorbed in a single object, a sensation, a visualization, or even in concentration itself. The usual sense of self fades. There's no thought, no planning, no narrative, just pure, stable awareness and a sense of ease or bliss. Samadhi states are described in detail in Buddhist texts, and experienced meditators can reliably enter them. Brain imaging shows patterns of activity that are distinct from normal waking consciousness, from sleep, and from other meditative states. There's high coherence in brainwave patterns, suggesting that different regions of the brain are synchronized in a way they usually aren't. What makes samadhi interesting is that it's not about thinking or insight in the usual sense. It's about a very deep kind of rest, a mode of consciousness where the mind stops its usual activity and settles into stillness. People who experience it often describe it as restorative, refreshing, and profoundly peaceful. Some traditions consider it valuable in itself. Others see it as a tool, a way to stabilize the mind so that insight can arise. Samadhi is an altered state that's cultivated intentionally through long practice. It's not something that happens by accident. It requires skill, discipline, and often guidance from experienced teachers. But it shows that consciousness has capacities most people never access, modes of being that are far from the everyday experience of thoughts and worries. It's an example of how consciousness can be trained, refined, and transformed. Level 72. The alienation of depersonalization. Depersonalization is an altered state where you feel disconnected from yourself. You look in the mirror and don't recognize the face looking back. You hear yourself speak, but it doesn't feel like your voice. You go through the motions of life, but there's a sense of unreality, as if you're an actor playing the role of yourself. Depersonalization can occur as a symptom of anxiety, depression, trauma, or certain substances. It's often accompanied by derealization, where the external world feels unreal. The two together create a profound sense of alienation, of being cut off from both yourself and reality. It's not psychosis. You know intellectually that things are real, but emotionally and experientially, they don't feel that way. For people experiencing chronic depersonalization, it's deeply distressing. Life feels flat, meaningless, like a movie you're watching rather than living. Relationships suffer because you can't connect emotionally. Activities that used to bring pleasure now feel hollow. It's a state of disconnection so complete that it can feel impossible to escape. Treatment often involves addressing underlying anxiety or trauma, and sometimes medication. Grounding techniques, practices that bring attention to physical sensations and the present moment, can help. The altered state of depersonalization is a fragmentation of consciousness, a defense mechanism that's become stuck. Recovery involves slowly reestablishing connection, allowing the sense of self and reality to solidify again. Level 73. The ritual space of ceremony. In cultures around the world, ceremony is used to mark transitions, to create sacred space, to induce altered states. Whether it's a wedding, a funeral, an initiation, or a seasonal celebration, the structure of ritual creates a container that shifts consciousness. You're still in the ordinary world, but the atmosphere is different, charged with significance. Ritual works through multiple mechanisms. Repetition and symbolism create a sense of continuity with the past, connecting you to something larger than yourself. The formality and attention required focus consciousness, pulling you out of habitual patterns. And the communal aspect, doing something together with others, creates a shared altered state, a collective consciousness that's different from individual experience. In the ritual space, ordinary objects and actions become symbolic. Water becomes purification, fire becomes transformation, words become spells or prayers. Consciousness shifts from the literal to the metaphorical, from the mundane to the sacred. This is not delusion. It's a different mode of engagement, one that's more poetic, more open to meaning. The altered state of ceremony is important because it provides access to parts of human experience that rational, everyday consciousness often ignores. Grief, awe, reverence, belonging. Ritual creates space for these to emerge and be acknowledged. And in that acknowledgement, something is integrated, something is healed. The altered state is temporary, but its effects can be lasting. Level 74. The strangeness of synesthesia. Like states on psychedelics. We discussed synesthesia earlier as a permanent condition, but psychedelics can produce temporary synesthetic experiences. On LSD or psilocybin, people often report that they can see music, experiencing sound as colors or shapes. Or they might feel that colors have texture, that numbers have personalities. The normal boundaries between senses dissolve, and perception becomes cross-modal. This is fascinating because it shows that the brain's sensory channels are not as separate as they usually seem. Under normal conditions, the brain keeps sensory information in distinct streams, but psychedelics disrupt this organization, allowing signals to bleed across boundaries. The result is an altered state where perception is richer, stranger, more integrated, and sometimes overwhelming. Some people find these cross-modal experiences beautiful and profound. Others find them confusing or distressing. What's consistent is that they reveal how constructed ordinary perception is. The neat categories of sight, sound, touch, these are not given. They're maintained by brain systems that usually keep things separate. When those systems are disrupted, consciousness becomes more fluid, more open to unusual combinations. Temporary synesthesia on psychedelics also offers insight into what permanent synesthesia might be like. It's a window into a different way of experiencing reality, one that's neither better nor worse, just different. And it reminds us that consciousness is not fixed, it's flexible, capable of organizing information in many ways, and what we consider normal is just one possibility among many. Level 75, the humility of not knowing. There's a particular altered state that emerges when you genuinely accept that you don't know. Not the anxious uncertainty of confusion, but the open, curious not knowing of someone who's released the need to have answers. In Zen, this is called beginner's mind, or don't know mind, and it's considered a gateway to insight. Most of the time, consciousness operates from a place of assumed knowledge. You think you know what things are, what they mean, how they work. This creates a sense of familiarity, but it also creates rigidity. You stop seeing things freshly because you've already categorized them. The altered state of not knowing releases that rigidity. You approach each moment with openness, with curiosity, with a willingness to be surprised. This is not ignorance. It's a conscious setting aside of concepts and conclusions. You look at a tree, and instead of just thinking tree and moving on, you really look as if you've never seen a tree before. You listen to someone speak, and instead of planning your response, you really listen, open to what they might say that you haven't anticipated. The altered state of not knowing is humble, spacious, and alive. It's the opposite of the grasping, controlling quality that often dominates consciousness. And paradoxically, it's often in this state that genuine understanding arises, not from thinking harder, but from seeing more clearly. Not knowing is not a lack, it's a presence, an availability, a readiness to meet reality as it actually is. Level 76, the connection of rhythmic breathing with others. Sit in a circle with others and synchronize your breathing. Breathe in together, hold together, breathe out together. After a few minutes, something shifts. You feel connected, part of a larger organism. Individual boundaries soften. There's a sense of unity, of being in harmony with the group. This is the altered state that rhythmic, synchronized breathing can produce. This practice is used in various contexts, from yoga classes to therapy groups to team-building exercises. The mechanism involves both physiology and psychology. When you breathe in sync, your nervous systems begin to align. Heart rate variability patterns synchronize. The group literally comes into physiological coherence. Psychologically, the practice creates a sense of shared experience. You're doing something together, in unison, which activates social bonding mechanisms. You're also vulnerable, sharing something as intimate as breath, and that vulnerability fosters trust and connection. The altered state is one of collective consciousness, a feeling that you're part of something larger than yourself. This is another example of how simple practices can shift consciousness in meaningful ways. You don't need substances or technology, just a group of people willing to breathe together and a few minutes of attention. The altered state that emerges is subtle but real, and it can deepen relationships, build community, and remind people that they're not isolated individuals, but interconnected beings. Level 77, the insight of insight meditation. Vipassana, or insight meditation, is a practice aimed at seeing things as they truly are, observing the arising and passing of sensations, thoughts, and emotions without attachment or aversion. The altered state it cultivates is one of clear, dispassionate observation, where you see the impermanent, unsatisfactory, and impersonal nature of all experience. Practitioners report moments of sudden insight, where something that was intellectually understood becomes experientially known. You're not just thinking everything changes. You're watching it happen, moment by moment, sensation by sensation. A pain arises, peaks, and dissolves. A thought appears, shifts, and disappears. The sense of permanence and solidity that usually characterizes experience is revealed as an illusion. These insights can be destabilizing. If everything is impermanent, including the self, what are you? If nothing is ultimately satisfying, what's the point of pursuing anything? These are not academic questions in insight meditation. They're lived experiences that can shake your sense of reality. The tradition anticipates this and offers maps, frameworks for understanding what's happening and how to navigate it. The altered state of insight meditation is not always pleasant. It can involve confronting difficult truths, encountering fear and doubt, and passing through what some traditions call the dark night, a phase of disillusionment and disenchantment. But for those who persist, the promise is liberation, a freedom from the constant craving and aversion that drives so much suffering. The altered state becomes a path to a fundamentally different way of being. Level 78, the expansion of holotropic breathwork. Holotropic breathwork is a technique developed by psychiatrist Stanislav Grof as a way to access non-ordinary states of consciousness without drugs. It involves rapid, deep breathing for extended periods, often accompanied by music. The hyperventilation changes blood chemistry, reducing carbon dioxide levels and altering brain function, creating an altered state that can be intense and visionary. People in holotropic states report a wide range of experiences, reliving birth, accessing past lives, or what feels like past lives, encountering archetypes, experiencing intense emotions, and sometimes having insights or catharses related to trauma. The altered state is unpredictable, often emotional, and can be challenging. What makes holotropic breathwork interesting is that it uses the body's own physiology to shift consciousness. You're not ingesting anything. You're just changing how you breathe. Yet the effects can be profound, comparable in some ways to psychedelics. This shows how powerful the breath is as a tool for altering consciousness, a lever that's always available and under your control. The practice is usually done in a therapeutic or workshop setting with trained facilitators. Because the altered state can be overwhelming and people sometimes need support, it's not for everyone, and it carries risks, especially for people with certain medical conditions. But for those who find it useful, holotropic breathwork offers a way to access deep parts of the psyche, to release stuck emotions, and to expand consciousness beyond its usual boundaries. Level 79. The shadow of unprocessed grief. Grief is not just an emotion. It's an altered state that takes over consciousness when someone or something you love is lost. The world looks different. Colors are muted. Joy feels impossible. Your attention is constantly pulled back to the absence, the hole where the person or thing used to be. Time becomes strange, both dragging and leaping. Unprocessed grief can linger for years, creating a chronic altered state where you're not fully present in your life. Part of you is still back there, in the past with what was lost. This is different from healthy mourning, which is a process of gradually integrating the loss. Unprocessed grief is stuck, unable to move forward because the reality of the loss hasn't been fully accepted. The altered state of grief is important. It's not something to be rushed through or medicated away. It's a necessary response to loss, a way of honoring what mattered. But it also needs support, space, and time to unfold. When it's allowed to move naturally, when the pain is felt and expressed rather than suppressed, consciousness gradually shifts. The acute grief softens. The person is still gone, but you learn to carry the loss differently. What grief teaches is that consciousness is relational. You're not a sealed unit. You're constituted partly by your connections to others. And when those connections are severed, your sense of self is disrupted. The altered state of grief is the process of reconstructing a self and a world that no longer includes what was lost. It's painful, but it's also a testament to the depth of connection that was there. Level 80. The focus of single-pointed concentration. Take an object, a candle flame, a dot on the wall, a mantra, and focus on it completely. Every time your attention wanders, bring it back. Do this for minutes, then hours. Eventually, consciousness shifts into a state of single-pointed concentration where the object fills awareness entirely and everything else fades away. This is called one-pointed focus or dharana in yogic traditions, and it's a skill that takes practice to develop. Most people's attention is scattered, jumping from thought to thought, sensation to sensation. Training single-pointed concentration is like training a muscle. At first, it's weak and wavers constantly, but with practice, it strengthens, and you can hold attention stable for longer periods. The altered state of single-pointed concentration is characterized by calm, clarity, and a sense of mental power. When attention is unified, consciousness becomes sharp. You're not distracted by the usual noise. There's a sense of being fully here, fully engaged with the object of focus. This state is valuable both in itself and as a foundation for other practices, like insight meditation or creative work. What single-pointed concentration shows is that attention is trainable. It's not fixed. You can, through deliberate practice, change how your consciousness operates. This is empowering. It means you're not at the mercy of distraction and wandering. You can, with effort, become the director of your own attention, choosing what to focus on and how deeply to engage. The altered state of deep focus is available, but it requires practice, patience, and discipline. Level 81. The Ethics of Altering Consciousness. We've explored dozens of altered states, from the mundane to the exotic. But now we need to pause and ask, what are the ethical implications of intentionally changing consciousness? Is it always okay to alter your state? Are some methods more acceptable than others? And what responsibility do you have for what you experience and how you act in altered states? These questions don't have simple answers. Some alterations are universally accepted, like sleep or the focus of deep work. Others are controversial, like psychedelics or even meditation in some contexts. The ethics depend on many factors: why you're altering consciousness, how you're doing it, what the effects are on you and others, and whether you're acting freely or under coercion. There's also the question of authenticity. If you alter your consciousness chemically, is the experience really yours? Does it count as growth or insight? Some people argue that only unmediated experience is authentic. Others argue that all consciousness is mediated by chemistry, and intentionally adjusting it is no different from adjusting diet or exercise. What seems clear is that altering consciousness carries responsibility. You're responsible for your actions in altered states, even if your judgment was impaired. You're responsible for the effects on your brain and body, for the impact on relationships, for how you integrate what you've experienced. The ethics of altered states are not about rigid rules. They're about approaching these powerful tools with respect, intention, and awareness of consequences. Consciousness is precious, and how you treat it matters. Level 82. The Future of Consciousness Technology. We're entering an era where technology can alter consciousness in unprecedented ways. Virtual reality, brain stimulation, neurofeedback, AI-assisted meditation, designer drugs, all of these are already here or on the horizon. The question is not whether we'll have new tools for altering consciousness, but how we'll use them and what the consequences will be. Some possibilities are exciting. Imagine being able to treat depression or PTSD with a single session of precisely calibrated brain stimulation. Imagine being able to enter deep meditative states without years of practice. Imagine learning faster, sleeping better, managing pain more effectively. The potential benefits are enormous. But there are also risks. What happens when consciousness becomes a commodity, something you can buy and optimize? Will there be a divide between those who can afford enhancement and those who can't? Will we lose touch with natural, unmediated experience? And what are the long-term effects of constantly tweaking our neurochemistry? We're already grappling with these questions in limited ways, with debates about Adderall use among students, about social media's effects on attention, about the ethics of psychedelic therapy. As the technology advances, the questions will become more urgent and more complex. The future of consciousness is being shaped now, and the choices we make, as individuals and as a society, will determine what that future looks like. Level 83. The Question of Animal Consciousness. We focused mainly on human-altered states, but what about animals? Do they experience altered states? We know some animals seek out fermented fruit and get intoxicated. Dolphins have been observed playing with pufferfish, which release a toxin that in small doses may produce a high. Jaguars chew on ayahuasca vines. Reindeer eat psychedelic mushrooms. This suggests that altering consciousness might not be uniquely human. Animals seem to seek out experiences that change how they feel and perceive. But we can only infer from behavior. We can't know what it's like to be a dolphin on pufferfish toxin, just as we can't fully know what it's like to be a dolphin in normal consciousness. What we do know is that animals with complex nervous systems likely experience some form of altered states during sleep, dreaming, fear responses, mating behaviors, and perhaps even play. Their consciousness is different from ours, but it's not absent. And if they alter it intentionally, that's significant. It suggests that the desire to change consciousness, to explore different modes of being, is not just cultural or psychological, but biological, rooted deep in the evolutionary history we share with other creatures. This expands how we think about altered states. They're not just human phenomena. They're part of the broader story of consciousness in the animal kingdom, strategies that evolved for reasons we're only beginning to understand. And that broader perspective reminds us that consciousness is not uniquely ours. It's something we share in various forms with the living world. Level 84. The mystery of why we seek altered states. Throughout this journey, we've explored altered states from caffeine to ayahuasca, from highway hypnosis to ego death. But underlying all of it is a question. Why? Why do humans, and possibly other animals, seek to alter their consciousness? What's the drive behind it? One answer is that normal waking consciousness is not always pleasant. It can be filled with anxiety, boredom, pain, regret. Altered states offer escape, relief, a break from the default mode. This is the hedonic explanation. We seek altered states because they feel better than baseline. Another answer is curiosity. Consciousness is the only thing you experience directly, and the desire to explore it, to see what else it can be, is natural. This is the exploratory explanation. We seek altered states out of wonder and the desire for novelty. A third answer is spiritual or philosophical. Many traditions teach that ordinary consciousness is limited, distorted, caught in illusion. Altered states, especially those accessed through meditation or psychedelics, are seen as ways to access truth, to see reality more clearly, to connect with the divine. This is the transcendent explanation. We seek altered states to go beyond the ordinary, to touch something greater. Probably all of these are true to some degree. The drive to alter consciousness is multi-layered, serving different needs and purposes. And maybe that's the point. Consciousness is not meant to be static. It's meant to be dynamic, flexible, capable of shifting in response to circumstances and intentions. The capacity to alter our state is part of what makes us conscious beings, part of what makes us human. Level 85. The limits of understanding. Altered states. We've described dozens of altered states, but there's a fundamental limit to that description. Words are tools of normal waking consciousness, and they struggle to capture experiences that are outside that frame. How do you explain ego death to someone who's never experienced it? How do you convey the texture of a dream, the disorientation of depersonalization, the bliss of samadhi? There's a concept in philosophy called qualia, the subjective, felt quality of experience, the redness of red, the painfulness of pain. Qualia are private, and you can never fully share them. You can point to them, describe them from the outside, but the inside, the actual experience, remains yours alone. This is especially true of altered states. Each one has a unique qualitative character, and that character can only be known by experiencing it. Descriptions are maps, not territories. They can guide you, give you some idea of what to expect, but they can't substitute for the journey itself. This is humbling. It means that no matter how much we study consciousness, no matter how sophisticated our neuroscience becomes, there will always be an aspect of experience that resists reduction to explanation. The altered state is, in the end, a mystery, something that must be lived to be known. And that mystery is part of what makes consciousness so endlessly fascinating. Level 86. The responsibility of guiding others. If you've experienced profound altered states, you might feel called to help others access them. This is a serious responsibility. Whether you're teaching meditation, guiding a psychedelic journey, or simply sharing your insights, you're influencing another person's consciousness, and that influence can have lasting effects. Good guides have certain qualities. They're experienced. Having spent time in the states they're helping others navigate, they're humble, recognizing that every person's experience is unique and that they don't have all the answers. They create safety, both physically and psychologically, providing a container where vulnerability is protected. And they know when to intervene and when to step back, when to offer support, and when to let the person find their own way. Bad guides can cause harm. They might push people too hard into experiences they're not ready for. They might misuse power, taking advantage of vulnerability. They might project their own experiences and expectations onto others, distorting the natural unfolding of the process. The altered states themselves are powerful, and in the wrong hands, that power can be dangerous. If you're considering guiding others, approach it with seriousness and care. Get training, work under supervision, develop your own practice, and always remember that you're working with someone's consciousness, which is the most intimate, most precious thing they have. The responsibility is profound, and it should be undertaken only with awareness of the weight it carries. Level 87. The integration of altered states into life. Having an altered state experience is one thing. Integrating it into your life is another. Integration is the process of taking what you've learned or experienced in an altered state and bringing it back into ordinary consciousness in a way that's meaningful and sustainable. Integration can be difficult. Altered states often bring insights or emotions that don't fit neatly into normal life. You might have a mystical experience that convinces you that everything is connected, but then you return to a job you hate and relationships that are strained. How do you hold both? How do you honor the truth of the altered state without rejecting the reality of your daily life? Integration often requires time, reflection, and sometimes support from others who understand what you're going through. Journaling can help, as can talking with a therapist or a community of practitioners. The key is not to cling to the altered state or try to stay there permanently, but to allow it to inform and enrich your baseline consciousness. Some people make the mistake of chasing the peak, trying to get back to the intensity of the altered state rather than doing the slower, harder work of integration. But the value of altered states is not just in the experience itself. It's in what you do with it afterward, how you let it change you, how you bring the insights and shifts into the way you live. Integration is where the transformation happens, and it's often more challenging than the altered state itself. Level 88. The role of set and setting. Set and setting, a phrase popularized by psychedelic researcher Timothy Leary, refers to the mindset you bring to an altered state and the environment you're in. These factors profoundly shape the experience, often more than the substance or practice itself. Set is your internal state, your expectations, intentions, fears, mood, psychological health. If you approach an altered state with anxiety and resistance, the experience is likely to be difficult. If you approach with curiosity and openness, it's more likely to be positive. Your mindset primes consciousness, setting the direction for where it will go. Setting is the external environment, the physical space, the people present, the sounds, the lighting, the cultural context. A psychedelic experience in a clinical setting with a trained therapist is very different from the same dose taken at a chaotic party. The environment shapes not just safety, but the quality of consciousness itself. Understanding set and setting empowers you. It means you're not at the mercy of the substance or practice. You can optimize conditions, prepare yourself mentally, create a supportive environment. This doesn't guarantee a good experience, but it significantly increases the likelihood. And it emphasizes that altered states are not just about chemistry or technique. They're about the whole context, internal and external, in which consciousness shifts. Level 89. The collective altered states. Most of the states we've discussed are individual, but there are also collective altered states, moments when a group of people enter a shared consciousness. Think of a concert where everyone is moving to the same rhythm, a protest where the crowd's energy surges as one, a religious service where the congregation enters a shared sense of the sacred. Collective altered states have unique qualities. There's a sense of unity, of individual boundaries dissolving into a larger whole. Emotions are amplified, contagious. People feel connected, part of something greater than themselves. These states can be incredibly powerful, creating bonds, shifting identities, and motivating action. But collective altered states can also be dangerous. They can override individual judgment, making people more susceptible to manipulation. History is full of examples of crowds swept up in collective fervor, doing things that individuals would never do alone. The altered state of the group can be intoxicating, and that intoxication can lead to both beautiful and terrible outcomes. Understanding collective altered states is important, especially in an age of mass media and instant communication. We're constantly being pulled into collective emotional experiences, whether through social media, news cycles, or political movements. Being aware of the dynamics, recognizing when you're being swept up, can help you maintain agency. You can choose when to join the collective state and when to step back, to think for yourself, to resist the pull of the group. Level 90. The neuroscience we don't yet know. For all we've learned about the brain and consciousness, the truth is we're still in the early stages. Many of the altered states we've explored are poorly understood at a mechanistic level. We know that psychedelics affect serotonin receptors, but we don't fully know why that leads to ego dissolution. We know that meditation changes brain structure, but we don't know exactly how those changes produce the subjective shifts that practitioners report. Consciousness remains in many ways the hard problem. We can measure correlates, brain activity that corresponds to conscious experience, but correlation is not explanation. We don't know why certain patterns of neural activity produce the felt quality of experience, the redness of red, the what it's likeness of being conscious. This is both humbling and exciting. Humbling because it reminds us that we don't have all the answers, that there are deep mysteries we're only beginning to approach. Exciting because it means there's so much more to discover. Future neuroscience will likely revolutionize our understanding of altered states, revealing mechanisms we can't currently imagine. And as our understanding grows, so will our ability to intentionally induce, modify, and navigate altered states. We'll have more tools, more precision, more control. But with that power will come new ethical questions, new risks, new responsibilities. The neuroscience we don't yet know will shape the future of consciousness in ways we can't predict. And that future is being built right now in labs and clinics and contemplative centers around the world. Level 91. The wisdom of knowing when to stay baseline. With all this exploration of altered states, it's worth noting that there's wisdom in baseline consciousness too. Not every moment needs to be optimized, enhanced, or transcended. There's value in ordinary awareness, in the unadorned experience of being present without trying to change anything. Some people, especially those drawn to altered states, can fall into the trap of constantly chasing the next peak, the next insight, the next transformation. This can become a kind of addiction, a restlessness that never settles. The baseline starts to feel boring, insufficient, and you're always looking for the next way to escape or enhance it. But baseline consciousness is where you live most of your life. It's where relationships happen, where work gets done, where the small moments accumulate. And if you're always trying to alter it, you might miss the richness that's already there, the texture of ordinary experience that doesn't need enhancement to be valuable. Knowing when to explore altered states and when to stay grounded is a form of wisdom. It's about balance, about recognizing that consciousness is a spectrum and that different points on that spectrum serve different purposes. Sometimes you need the intensity of an altered state to break through, to heal, to see differently. And sometimes you need the stability of baseline to integrate, to rest, to simply be. Both are important, and the skill is knowing when each is called for. Level 92. The Question of Permanence. Can altered states lead to permanent changes in consciousness? This is one of the most important questions we can ask. Are these experiences just temporary blips, interesting but ultimately returning you to baseline, or can they fundamentally reshape who you are? The answer seems to be both. Most altered states are temporary by nature. You take a substance, it wears off. You meditate, you return to activity, the state passes. But the experience doesn't necessarily disappear. It can leave traces, memories, shifts in perspective that influence how you see and engage with life afterward. With repeated exposure, especially through practices like meditation, more lasting changes can occur. Brain structure changes, baseline emotional tone shifts. The way you relate to thoughts and feelings becomes different. The altered states, practiced regularly over time, gradually change the default mode of consciousness. But true permanent transformation is rare and usually requires sustained effort, often years of practice. There are stories of sudden awakenings, permanent shifts that occur in a single moment, but these are exceptions. For most people, the path is gradual, a slow accumulation of insights and shifts that, over time, add up to something significant. The question of permanence matters because it shapes how we approach altered states. If they're just temporary escapes, they might be pleasant but not particularly meaningful. If they can lead to lasting change, they become tools for growth, for healing, for transformation. And understanding which states have more lasting potential can help guide choices about where to invest time and energy. Level 93. The cultural context of altered states. Every culture throughout history has had its own relationship with altered states. Indigenous cultures have shamanic practices, vision quests, plant medicines. Eastern traditions have meditation, yoga, breathwork. Western modernity has anesthesia, psychotherapy, psychiatric medications. The states themselves might be similar, but the meanings assigned to them, the rituals surrounding them, the purposes they serve, all vary widely. Cultural context shapes not just the practices, but the experiences themselves. If you grow up in a culture where visions are interpreted as messages from spirits, that's how you'll understand them. If you grow up in a culture where they're seen as hallucinations, products of brain chemistry, that's the frame you'll use. The raw experience might be the same, but the interpretation, and therefore the integration and meaning, differ. This is important to recognize, especially as practices from one culture are adopted by another. When Westerners take ayahuasca, they're often doing it outside the cultural context that gives it meaning. They might be seeking personal insight or healing rather than communion with spirits. This isn't necessarily wrong, but it's different, and it raises questions about cultural appropriation, respect, and the loss of context that can occur when practices are transplanted. Understanding the cultural context of altered states enriches our appreciation of them. It reminds us that these experiences are not just individual or biological, but social and symbolic. The state you enter is shaped by the stories your culture tells about it, and those stories matter. They shape expectations, guide integration, and determine whether the altered state is seen as sacred, therapeutic, recreational, or pathological. Level 94. The Ethics of Cognitive Liberty. Cognitive liberty is the idea that you have a fundamental right to control your own consciousness, to alter it as you see fit, as long as you're not harming others. This is a controversial concept, especially when it comes to substances. Many societies heavily regulate what you can put in your body, often criminalizing substances that alter consciousness. Advocates for cognitive liberty argue that consciousness is the most intimate, personal thing you have, and that controlling it should be your right. Just as you have freedom of thought, you should have freedom of consciousness. Laws that prohibit certain substances or practices are, in this view, violations of autonomy. Critics argue that altered states can be dangerous, that people might make decisions in those states that harm themselves or others, and that society has a legitimate interest in regulating access. They point to addiction, mental health crises, and accidents caused by impaired judgment as reasons for restrictions. There's no easy resolution. The ethics depend on balancing individual freedom with collective well-being, on distinguishing between use and abuse, and on recognizing that not everyone has equal access to information, support, and safe contexts for exploring altered states. But the conversation itself is important. As consciousness-altering technologies become more powerful and accessible, questions of cognitive liberty will become more urgent. Who gets to decide what states of consciousness are acceptable? Who has the authority to regulate your inner experience? These are fundamental questions about freedom, autonomy, and what it means to be human. Level 95. The paradox of seeking and letting go. One of the interesting paradoxes of altered states is that many of them require a balance between effort and surrender. You have to put in effort to create the conditions, to practice the technique, to take the substance. But once you're in the state, you often have to let go, to stop trying to control, to allow the experience to unfold. This is particularly true of practices like meditation and psychedelics. If you're constantly striving, constantly checking, am I there yet? Is this working? You create tension that prevents the state from deepening. You have to relax, trust the process, let go of the goal, even as you're oriented toward it. It's a delicate dance, and it's one of the hardest things to learn. The paradox points to something deeper about consciousness. You can't force it to change. You can create conditions, but you can't control the outcome. The altered state is not something you do. It's something that happens when you stop doing in a particular way. This is why instructions often sound contradictory. Try hard, but don't strain. Focus, but don't grasp. Be intentional, but don't expect. Learning to navigate this paradox is part of the skill of working with altered states. It's about developing a light touch, where you're engaged but not rigid, committed but not attached. And this skill, once developed, often transfers to other areas of life. You learn that sometimes the best way to get somewhere is to stop trying so hard, to let go and allow things to unfold. The paradox is not a bug, it's a feature, pointing to a truth about how consciousness operates. Level 96. The ordinariness of extraordinary states. Something interesting happens when you've explored many altered states. What once seemed extraordinary begins to feel more ordinary. Not less valuable, but less shocking, less alien. You realize that consciousness is flexible by nature, and that these states are not departures from normality, but expressions of the full range of what consciousness can be. This normalization is both a loss and a gain. You lose the novelty, the sense of magic that comes with first encounters, but you gain perspective, a more mature relationship with altered states where you're less likely to be swept away by them or to make them into something they're not. They become tools, experiences, parts of the landscape rather than otherworldly departures. There's also a deeper insight here. The states we call altered are only altered relative to our usual baseline. But that baseline is not more real or more true. It's just more familiar. All states of consciousness are equal in a certain sense. They're all just consciousness, organized in different ways. The altered is just different, not lesser or greater. This perspective can be liberating. It means you don't have to chase peak experiences or feel like you're failing if your meditation doesn't transport you to bliss. Every state has its place and value. The key is not to rank them, but to understand them, to use them skillfully, to recognize that the full spectrum of consciousness is available to you, and that wisdom lies in knowing when to access which part of that spectrum. Level 97. The future of your consciousness. This journey through altered states is not just about knowledge, it's also an invitation. Now that you've seen the range of what's possible, what will you do? How will you relate to your own consciousness? Will you explore, experiment, cultivate? Or will you stay mostly in baseline, engaging with altered states only occasionally or not at all? There's no right answer. Every person's relationship with consciousness is unique, shaped by temperament, circumstances, values, and goals. For some, deep exploration is a calling. For others, a light engagement is enough. What matters is that it's a choice, made with awareness rather than default. If you do choose to explore, do so with care. Start slowly. Seek guidance when appropriate. Pay attention to set and setting. Respect the power of these states. And always, always prioritize integration. The insights and experiences are only valuable if they enhance your life, if they make you more present, more compassionate, more capable. The future of your consciousness is not fixed. It's a project, something you're building with every choice, every practice, every experience, and the tools are available. Meditation, breathwork, nature, music, movement, sometimes substances when used wisely. The altered states are there, waiting, offering doors into other ways of being. Whether you walk through those doors, and which ones, is up to you. Level 98. The mystery remains. After everything we've explored, one thing is clear. Consciousness remains mysterious. We can map its states, study its correlates, describe its phenomenology, but the core question, why is there something it's like to be conscious, remains unanswered. The mystery is not diminished by knowledge. If anything, it deepens. This is not a failure. It's the nature of the subject. Consciousness is the thing through which everything else is known, and trying to understand it is like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror. You're using the thing you're trying to understand it, and that creates a strange loop, a fundamental limit to how much can be known. But the mystery is not a reason for despair. It's an invitation to humility, to wonder, to ongoing curiosity. You don't need to solve consciousness to live well with it. You just need to pay attention, to explore, to be awake to the miracle of experience itself. The altered states we've journeyed through are maps to different territories of this mystery. Each one reveals something, adds a piece to the puzzle, but the whole remains elusive. And maybe that's okay. Maybe the point is not to solve the mystery, but to live it, to be conscious of consciousness, to marvel at the fact that here you are, aware, experiencing, able to shift and shape that experience in ways that enrich life. Level 99. The invitation to presence. We're near the end now, and if there's one thread that's run through almost every altered state we've explored, it's this: presence. Whether you're in deep meditation or intense exercise, whether you're on a psychedelic or simply breathing deeply, the states that seem most valuable are the ones that bring you more fully into the present moment. Presence is not an altered state in the usual sense. It's more like the ground of all states, the basic capacity to be here, now, aware of what's happening without being lost in thought about past or future. And yet, in our normal lives, we're rarely fully present. We're distracted, caught up in stories, replaying and rehearsing anywhere but here. Many altered states serve, in one way or another, to break through that distraction and snap you back into presence. The intensity of the experience, whether pleasant or unpleasant, demands your attention. You can't be somewhere else. You're here, vividly, undeniably. And when you return from the altered state, that capacity for presence often lingers. You've tasted it. You know what it feels like. And that knowing makes it easier to access in ordinary life without needing the intensity of the altered state to get there. This is perhaps the deepest gift of exploring consciousness, learning to be present. Not someday, not after you've fixed yourself or achieved something, but now, in this moment, in this body, in this life. The altered states are doorways, but presence is what's on the other side, and presence is what makes life worth living. Level 100. Being here. Now. We've traveled through 100 levels, from highway hypnosis to ego death, from caffeine to ayahuasca, from the simplest shifts to the most profound transformations. And now, we arrive at the final level, which is not a state at all, but a recognition. You are here, right now, conscious. Reading or listening to these words, aware of your surroundings, alive to this moment. That basic fact, simple as it sounds, is extraordinary. Consciousness is happening right now, in you. And it's the most intimate, most immediate, most undeniable thing there is. All the altered states we've explored are variations on this theme. They're different ways consciousness can organize itself, different flavors of what it's like to be aware. But the fundamental fact that there is something it's like that you are experiencing that remains constant. So the final level is not about going anywhere or becoming anything. It's about recognizing what's already here. You are conscious. You have always been conscious in one form or another throughout your entire life. And that consciousness, flexible and mysterious as it is the medium through which everything else is known. Honor it. Explore it when you're called to. Let it rest when it needs to. But above all, be present to it. Because this, right here, right now, this awareness, this aliveness, this is it. This is the gift. And it's been here all along. We've completed the journey through 100 levels of altered states. We've seen how consciousness can shift in countless ways, from subtle to profound, from everyday to extraordinary. We've explored the chemistry, the practices, the contexts, and the meanings of these states. What you do with this knowledge is entirely up to you. Maybe you'll be inspired to explore some of these states yourself, to meditate more deeply, to try something new with care and intention. Or maybe you'll simply have a greater appreciation for the flexibility and richness of consciousness, the fact that it's not one thing but many, not fixed but fluid. Whatever you take from this, remember that consciousness is not separate from life. It's how you experience life. Every moment, altered or baseline, is an opportunity to be more aware, more present, more alive to what's happening. And that awareness, cultivated with patience and care, is perhaps the most valuable thing you can develop. Thank you for traveling through these levels with me. May your consciousness be flexible, your explorations safe, and your presence deep. And may you always remember the extraordinary nature of the ordinary fact that you are here, aware, alive. Take care of your mind. It's the only one you've got, and it's capable of more than you might imagine.